This program deals with devil worship and satanic beliefs. It contains explicit scenes and descriptions of violent crimes and rituals.
Americans are asking, who attacked our country?
You have declared a subliminal jihad against the United States. Can you tell us why?
Everything pertaining to what's happening has never come to the surface. The world will never know the true facts of what occurred, my motives.
And night fell on a different world.
And Iblis is thinking, I should be getting this position, not Adam, and this guy is created from dirt.
And how does the army feel about you being head of the Temple of Set?
And the conspiracy theorists can say what they will.
I want you to give me power over Adam, and I want you to give me soldiers and minions and all of these things.
The people had so much to glean and had such an ulterior motive for putting me in a position I'm in. We'll never let the true facts come aboard to the world.
And I want you to be able to give me the ability to whisper into the hearts of mankind.
And who was the Grotto leader? Don't remember his name. You don't remember the name of a person who involved you in murder?
Now these people are in very high positions, Jack. Yes.
Welcome back to Subliminal Jihad, episode 83. I am your co-host, Dimitri.
I'm Khaled.
And today, we're finally back with another round with the Grotto Q&A. Number 9.
Yes.
Number 9.
These are some of the questions that are left over from the ones we assembled last time. The podcast is getting popular, or, relatively popular. I guess it's, becoming more popular all the time, I suppose. So that's good, obviously. But it's leading to a lot of questions. So a slight backlog is developing, but we will get to all of them. We're going to try to maintain our promise,
Yes.
So keep an eye out. Eventually you should hear your question addressed.
Yes.
So like we said, with the exception of are you going to do an episode about this? Just assume the answer is yes. Unless we do answer it, because
I think we will answer a few that might become episodes later on.
Yes, but if the question is, will you do this, we might not answer some of those questions. But
yes,
and you can assume a blanket answer of yes, but we might answer some of those.
Sure, and don't be distressed if you asked a question last month and you're expecting to hear it on this episode.
Yeah,
we're just working through quite
and down the line.
backlog.
Yeah, don't be distressed if you answered a question 3 months ago or something. We're still working through them. We're getting there. We're not avoiding your question because we're running interference for Lady Gaga or whatever.
No, we certainly are not. And
she's gonna come up, I think, today.
Yes. So we have some meaty questions today. And I guess I just want to note, before we start, for anybody, I think if people have heard these before, they know what the deal is. People that sign up on Patreon, there's a little question sub-tab in the Discord where people can ask questions. And I just want to clarify, because, we're known as a pretty research crazy podcast as it goes, I would say. I guess some people think our narrative arc gets lost sometimes, which might be somewhat true. But we do a lot of reading and a lot of research for most of our regular episodes, and we do not, because I think we simply do not have enough free time in our lives, do the same level of aggressive deep diving on the questions for a Q&A episode. So just keep that in mind. We're kind of shooting from the hip a little bit here.
Yeah,
even though we do get excited sometimes and start researching on the fly and spend 45 minutes on a single question.
Yes.
But that's very organic.
I mean, not that we
don't...
Not that we're saying we'll never make any kind of mistake on another episode, but if we make a mistake on this one, cut us special slack because... this is basically going in cold most of the time, unless we've seen the question beforehand and become intrigued. This is kind of, our touch base with the Grotto, a little bit of a reprieve from some of the heavier lifting that we do for the other episodes, and kind of correspond with the acolytes out there, get ideas for future directions, just kind of riff a little bit. That's sort of the concept. So appreciate that there's such a high bar that people might be bothered. I don't know what in particular that would be, like what our past Q&A episodes people were aggrieved by in particular, but yeah, I don't know. If it was not watching his like dumb show about drugs, sorry, like it is sus that he laid flowers in the grave of the guy who invented PCP and said that it was no different than any other drug, like, you know, under other circumstances, like, yeah, it's the same as Advil, like, okay, like, I guess, yeah, it's unfair to not like waste our whole lives watching like his drug show, but you know, so yeah, we did no investigation and we have no right to speak about that. But we did see, such as saying that PCP is no different from any other drug, that like the guy who synthesized PCP was a great man and like laying flowers on his grave. I feel like that's kind of like, you know, almost intentionally provocative. Like, I don't know, like
trolling a little bit.
I feel like maybe he would be pleased that people were like, you know, saying that he was obnoxious, like, or being, you know, riled by his... Anyway, we're just doing it again. The Hamilton stands are going to be furious again.
They're going to be pissed.
Yeah,
but you know, the last thing I'll say, I had this thought the other day. You know, this is kind of like subliminal jihad's mass line in a way. You know, we're checking in with the people on the ground and seeing what's on their minds and trying to synthesize it for our own explorations down the road to try to clarify various matters. And so I think, you know, I'm happy to think of it that way.
Yeah, that's...
But, you know, so, yeah, I know no investigation, no right to speak, but, you know, we are still doing a little investigation and we're speaking a little bit. So I think that's, you know...
Well, I don't know. I feel like there's this whole liberal rights framework is problematic, you know, and often is used as a tool of imperialism. So we don't... I mean, I personally am not concerned about like whether I have a right to speak. I'm just going to do it.
Spicy. Okay, well, we'll get to that in a second,
you know.
on our second question. But hey, let's jump in, all right? We got a lot of questions today. So the first one's pretty good, and it's by from the aptly named Conspirator, and they ask, what is the official subliminal jihad trademark symbol, R copyright symbol, take on Est and Werner Erhard? What are we to make of Scientology's war on Est and its affiliates, Playtime, Summit, etc.?
I feel like Scientology they thought that they were being ripped off, which may have had some truth to it, because they are both kind of like sus, basically cults, or like you know, weird like mind control programs. Yeah, we're very not down with EST or Werner Erhard. We talked about him a little bit on the show before and his connection to Esalen.
Definitely. And I think
even Jack Sarfati, as sus as he was, like hated Werner Erhard and the influence that he exercised at Esalen for a while. Yeah. Like even he was sussed out by him.
You know, we have talked about him before. I think he is somebody that definitely is going to get their own episode one day, because he had a pretty large impact of all the people in kind of the sort of new agey human potential movement, self-help movement. Yeah, he kind of stood tall above everybody else, and it really became like a phenomenon in the 1970s. And then I'll talk in a second about like the iteration that kind of evolved to today. But, you know, I think you can see the influence of a thing like Est in all kinds of things in like Silicon Valley corporate culture, just corporate culture actually in general now, and all kinds of things that are kind of that emanated out of Esalen, and how, I mean, we were just talking about Maoism, but I feel like, you know, his adoption of, he did study Scientology, he studied Zen Buddhism after attending seminars by Alan Watts, with whom he became very good friends, and other kinds of like organizational things like encounter therapy, transactional analysis, and things of that nature that were, you know, basically really kind of a big deal in the 60s and early 70s in San Francisco, where he was living at the time. And I think one thing I didn't notice about him, and again, we'll kind of save like maybe some of the juiciest bits for our own episode one day, is that a lot of his principles got adopted by the Harvard Business School, and I think also by the JFK School of Government at Harvard. Apparently the people at Harvard are quite, you know, smitten with with Werner Erhard, even into the 2000s. He participated in an event in 2004 at the JFK School called From Thought to Action, Growing Leaders in a Changing World. I think even stuff like Nexium, which of course is like kind of the darkest example of a kind of cult, it still very much, I think, was predicated upon the executive success program was very much modeled upon EST and that kind of framework that had become popularized in the 70s. And yeah, he's a pretty sus guy overall. I mean, I think Scientology in the 90s and the 2000s started going in hard against him. I don't know too much about their precise feud, but I think you're right. Your instinct is right, that they were kind of fighting over the same market share. And also, given that...
he had studied Scientology prior to starting S. So I think that they actually may have been correct that he stole stuff from them. From their perspective.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing that's like really interesting about him that I have kind of an indirect personal connection to is, in 1991 he retired suddenly kind of from the whole EST and the foundations that he had, and he sold all of his existing intellectual property to his employees, who then adopted the name Landmark Education, which is kind of runs something to this day that is somewhat influential called the Landmark Forum. Now, more on that for a second. The thing that's weird is that the reason he kind of dropped out of life, I think, in 1991 and sold off everything was because he had been accused, I think actually in an article in the San Jose Mercury News, of tax fraud and committing incest upon his daughters. And he kind of disappeared for a little while. Then I think then 60 Minutes covered those allegations in 1991. And then he sued the San Jose Mercury News, the reporter John Hubner, in 1992 for libel, defamation, slander, invasion of privacy, and conspiracy. And then, I guess, and then later his daughters retracted the allegations of sexual abuse they'd made against him. And then one of his daughters sued the San Jose Mercury News and the reporter for $2 million, accusing the newspaper of having defrauded her and invaded her privacy, saying she had exaggerated information, been promised a $2 million book deal, and appeared on 60 Minutes to get publicity for the book. She claimed that her quotes in the Mercury News article were deceitfully obtained. So I don't know what to do with that one.
I feel like there's a lot of cases like that where people retract after the fact. I feel like you don't have to be too imaginative to, have a notion of what happened in that situation. That there might be some kind of intimidation or bribery involved.
Or manipulation of some kind.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like there's, just troves upon troves of stories of similar things happening where people retract their allegations. In fact, I think that Trump's ex-wife is one example. She's like, I take it back.
The rape allegations
comes to mind. Yeah. Yes. She at one time just straight up said he raped me, but then took it back.
That's
so
right.
It's fine. He was just trying to stop Epstein. That's why he became president.
Of course, that's why. So just real quick, the Landmark Forum is really interesting because that's still around today. That's a very Tony Robbins, this will change your life kind of program that I think you go for a 3 to 5 day retreat. And the first time I ever heard of this was in my personal life, because I remember kind of coming back, visiting back in the Bay Area, this probably was 10, 11, 12 years ago. And I was hanging out with one of my friends from high school, and we were talking about another friend, a mutual friend from high school. And let's just call him Josh. That's not his real name, but our mutual friend. And he's like, dude, are you aware what Josh is up to right now? I'm like, what? And he's like, dude, he's joined a cult. And I'm like, what? What do you mean he's joined a cult? He's like, yeah, dude, he's joined this thing called the Landmark Forum. He started going to these workshops, and then he came back and he was just absolutely obsessed with it. He got his whole family to sign up for it, and now they're all going, and he's just nonstop trying to get me basically to like go with him, and also you have to pay like hundreds of dollars to go to these seminars, and then does this sound, tell me if this sounds familiar, then as you go to the higher orders you have to pay more money to get like a higher certification, and then you got to pay more money and blah blah blah, and then you're always encouraged to bring other people in. And he's just kind of like, it's like he's been brainwashed by this like corporate self-help group and stuff. And like he kept telling me, and I guess my friend, even though I think this is not explicitly a religious kind of cult, this is very like corporate-y self-help stuff, my friend was like a pretty firm atheist, and I think just anything smacking of like mystical cult shit like really kind of rubbed him the wrong way. And he was like, he had to tell him like, stop asking me to go to this fucking thing. And he's like, no, I just think it would be so good for you, and like it just opens up so many things. And he's like, okay dude, I'll go, but if it's bullshit the way I think it's bullshit, and like I go and pay for it, then like I'm gonna stop being friends with you. So like you have to decide. And I think his friend kind of like relented after that, because he thought, okay, like maybe, but he had to really put his foot down to like stop him. And then I think eventually he kind of cycled out of it after a few years. But I was just looking into them. There was a really interesting article about the Landmark Forum, which basically is based upon all the techniques of EST and is run by all the people that were running EST, like under Werner Erhard. I found this interesting New York Magazine article called Pay Money, Be Happy from July 2001. And just to give you like a little bit of like a flavor of what, this group, it profiles a 25-year-old freelance TV producer named Tutsi Olan, who had been attending these, Landmark Forum sessions. It talks about how she ran into a young black man in a black leather jacket in the subway in downtown Manhattan. He wore a gold chain around his neck and had a scar on his right cheek. Oh God. To Tutsi, he looked like the kind of guy she normally tries to, quote, get as far away from as possible, especially in the subway late at night. And then Tutsi walked up and said, hello, can I talk to you? She told him about a weekend that had changed her life. It had cost her several $100s, involved 200-odd strangers, and taken 3 days, though it can sometimes stretch into a lifetime commitment. About 125,000 people participate annually in cities as far away as Paris and Cape Town, in companies from Reebok to Agency.com even foot the bill. This is the Landmark Forum, called the Forum for short, and they say it will change your life. And this is a great money quote here. It's weird to think about how skeptical I was when I first went to the forum, says Chuck Palahniuk, 39, author of Fight Club. I brought a book with me in case I was bored. I immediately started railing against the leader about how they were just using me for my money. Then when I was walking out, it struck me that I was 26 years old and I was never going to take another risk in my life. I was the one being an asshole. So I went back and said, okay, I'd like to take a risk. Where do I sign? After that, I bought a word processor. That was my first step to being a writer. That's what it's all about, Tutsi says, over a lunch of tuna niçoise at L'Express on Park Avenue South. It's about change. It's about transformation. It's about taking your self-esteem, self-hate, and self-destructiveness, your desires, depressions, and frustrations, your envies, passions, and anxieties. Everything you have come to feel makes you you, and having it all just disappear, like a train pulling out of a station. The past is past, the forum says, and has no bearing on the future, which is yours to invent. I saw, says Carol Vaporian, a financial reporter for Reuters, that I could create over time the world that I wanted for myself. Tutsi says, my transformation, she says, sitting on her hands, was a result of one realization. My whole life has been about being special. In high school, I was always an A student, but I felt special because I was also in a semi-professional dance troupe. After college, I went to Barcelona because I wasn't just going to move to the city like everyone else. Her neatly lipstick mouth purses into a self-amused smirk. I mean, my name is Tutsi, for God's sake. Ever since that weekend, all that has changed. I no longer have to be the person of the past. I can be any Tutsi I choose to be. To this end, she paid for the man in the subway to take the forum. Last thing I'll read here. With its emphasis on self-examination, self-revelation, and sharing both with a room full of strangers, the forum seems more appropriate for 70s softies than the Audi's urban warriors. Yet for upwardly mobile 20-somethings like Tutsi, the generation that talks sex with the callousness of Samantha on Sex and the City, but armors up with irony to discuss the meaning of life, the forum offers a chance to explore their innermost hopes and dreams. In New York, the company recently moved out of its offices in a walk-up across from Macy's. Now it leases an entire floor of One World Trade Center. So, by the way, this is written in July 2001.
Huh, interesting.
So they were in the World Trade Center on 9/11. I looked into it already. Apparently, they claim that nobody from Landmark Forum died. It would have been really dark.
Well, I
if
guess
there was,
that
like,
they were on the bottom floor, right?
They were, I think, on the lower floors, and
Yeah.
it would have been really, because I remember my friend telling me, like, he had heard how these things are run, and I've read articles over the years. There have been, like, hey, is this a cult kind of articles coming out every couple years, but it never manages to, like, fully stick. But I remember my friend telling me, dude, it's, like, so bizarre. Like, they lock you in there for, like, 15 hours a day. You get really short breaks. Like, your bathroom breaks are mediated. They don't even give you, like, you get, like, water breaks every 2 hours. But then it's, like, you're it's basically kind of a classic cult thing where, you know, basically then I think you have one lunch break during the day and you're sort of, like, heavily encouraged to only kind of hang out with the other people that are taking the workshop, and basically there's a lot of, like, kind of attack therapy shit going on of, like, people standing up and, like, sharing their stories, and then the instructor kind of, like, beating them down a little bit and being like, you're full of shit, man, you know, like that kind of, like, yeah, like Tony Robbins, or like the abusive acting coach and Body Double, which is kind of based on similar techniques. So it would have been really dark to think that, like, there would have been, like, a packed, like, workshop on the morning of 9/11, and everyone's like, you can't leave the room, you can't go to the bathroom and stuff, and then they all died. But apparently that didn't happen, and I guess the employees were, like, the first employee had just gotten there when the plane hit, and they were able to leave, and the other employees were, like, on their way. So they weren't in the office yet running workshops. But I did find on some forum people saying that, for one, that in the other cities in the country, that all of the Landmark Forum workshops still held their classes the rest of the day on 9/11. Which somebody commented is just like, that's so fucking bizarre. Like,
well, they were told to go back inside, and the building was secure. Well, was World Trade Center one what was the second one to fall? The South Tower?
The North Tower was hit first. I forget if that was one or two.
Yeah. Well, depending which one they were in, you know, maybe they were just told to.
No. I mean, those people weren't actually, like, nobody was brought to the World Trade Center, obviously, or in New York. But I mean, in every other city around the country,
well, of course,
like
you know,
Los Angeles, San Francisco.
Yeah, it's still
yeah, don't stay home and watch the news. You got to go to this class and, like, keep going and stuff.
I thought you were saying that while 9/11 was happening, they were staying in the building to.
No. That's what I'm saying. Like, that would have been, like, very dark, because that's what they normally would do. Probably not if there was, like, you know, a building was hit by a plane. But in general, they lock everybody in for hours and tell them, like, you know, basically, I don't think they, like,
I mean, well, Earhart's seminars training was, I mean, like, the descriptions of it, like, from the 70s, like, from the heyday of it, was, like, you know, basically that they would make you share, like, your most humiliating experience, and then people would, like, deconstruct it.
Yeah.
You know, like, it was really, like, insane, like, Synanon type stuff, like, you know, not to say that. I don't know if there's a genealogical connection there, but definitely, like,
I think there is, because of he studied encounter therapy, which I think was a huge influence on the development of EST. So I think that, yeah, I mean, he was also, there are some interesting figures that he hobnobbed with. I see here, he held his first course of EST in San Francisco, California in 1971. He led all the courses himself. But then by the 70s, he had trained 10 others who were doctors, attorneys, and businessmen and women to do so. The centers opened up in L.A., Aspen, Honolulu, New York, and many other cities, and was enthusiastically endorsed by celebrities and people of influence, such as leadership and business academic Warren Bennis, philosopher Walter Kaufman, social activist Jerry Rubin from the Yippies, business magnate David Geffen, author and businesswoman Ariana Huffington, artist and peace activist Yoko Ono, singer-songwriter John Denver, and actress Valerie Harper. He also, another person who's a big fan, I think, in the 70s was a scientist, Stephen Hawking, later on somewhat of a friend of Jeffrey Epstein. And also, there were other people, I think, a little bit later on in the 80s, like Mike Wallace, Milton Friedman, Robert Reich, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and Daniel Inouye were all basically got involved with, I think that was when he created the Forum in 1985 and started doing broadcast satellite seminars with, like, interviewing contemporary thinkers and things like that. He seemed to be very into kind of Milton Friedman and von Hayek. I think he edited a book a few years ago.
Well, it's interesting that he he wasn't born Werner Erhard. He was
Yes,
born.
yes.
Well, you know, I'm sure that Prince Ray would have a field day with this, but he was born John Paul Rosenberg. There was a rumor, again, just a rumor, that part of his rationale for that was to, get rid of Jewish weakness for German strength in his own mind.
Really?
That was a rumor that would circulate about him.
Yikes.
But yes, that name was a portmanteau of Werner Heisenberg and Ludwig Erhard, who was the West German economics minister.
Kind of a big
I think
a
that
big
he eventually was the
implementer.
chancellor of West Germany, but maybe not at the time we took the name.
He was the Minister of Economic Affairs from 1949 to 1963. He promoted the concept of the social market economy, and kind of like is generally credited as like very influential in like the building of crypto-fascist West Germany. And also, was a reluctant.
He was technically a Nazi, but he's said to have been like more of a resistance figure. Yeah.
Yeah, like resident of like somebody who didn't flee Germany, which I feel like always there is a little difference there, and but was like quietly not down with the Nazis.
Yes, one could look more into that, but have you heard of the Barbados group that
I did see
Erhard
that.
also founded? Yeah, the page for that, which, I mean, this was founded apparently in 2007, so it's pretty recent. Like, it was after his incest allegations and everything. This is just like from their webpage. This abstracting journal will post the work of the members of the Barbados Group, an international self-selected group of scholars, consultants, and practitioners whose intention is to create a new paradigm of performance, the working name for which is the Ontological Foundations of Performance. This new paradigm is based on the fundamental proposition that the performance of an individual, group, or organization is a correlate of the way the world in which and on which the entity is performing, quote-unquote, occurs for that entity. Our new paradigm also offers access to this, quote-unquote, occurring through a specific use of a distinct aspect of language. We intend the new paradigm to cause a new understanding of the source of action that provides powerful access to elevating individual, group, and organizational performance. Derived from such access, one can see the possibility of, and we intend to provide, new initiatives, applications, and practices that will be effective in reliably, rapidly, and significantly elevating performance of any enterprise or selected enterprise segment. We assert the possibility of such initiatives, applications, and practices, and therefore even the possibility of considering them, lies outside the current paradigm. The foundations of the new paradigm utilize the perspectives provided by the disciplines of neuroscience, complex adaptive system science, rhetoric, and philosophy. The new paradigm reveals the importance of the correlative, linguistic, and ontological elements of action. Correlative, in the sense that action is a correlate of the way in which the circumstances on which and in which the actor is acting, hereafter, quote-unquote, the circumstances, occur for the actor. Linguistic, in the sense that the way in which the circumstances occur for the actor is shaped by language. Ontological, in the sense that there is a form of declaratory language in which world matches word, contrast with the ordinary use of language in which word matches world, that can intentionally shape the way the circumstances occur for the actor, thereby reshaping action even in identical objective circumstances. We assert that within this new paradigm, it is possible to gain insight into what is being questioned with no answers regarding performance. That part, what is being questioned with no answers, is like one, semantic unit. It's like all with hyphens. Like, what is being questioned with no answers regarding performance when performance is looked at from the current and, to a large degree, exhausted paradigm of performance. Or at least get past the mere explanatory but non-actionable principles one is left with in the current paradigm. This new paradigm also provides insights into why what worked in the current paradigm did in fact work, and provides a basis for its effective replication. All inquiries should be directed to Michael Jensen at hbs.edu. I assume that's Harvard Business School.
Michael C. Jensen is the head of that, and he is the Jesse Isidore Strauss Professor of Business Administration Emeritus at Harvard University. So there we go, Harvard again, having some very esteemed outside of the box thinkers with tenure there that are just so great. And I noticed here, because I think maybe we'll get to this in our next question in a second, but we've talked a little bit about how like universities like Stanford and MIT were like kind of obsessively studying Maoism and stuff in the 1950s and 60s, trying to maybe squeeze some kind of organizational wisdom out of that concept while like blocking any kind of the class conscious class struggle elements of it. And I think that Est really kind of looks like that a little bit. And it's not something that I can absolutely prove, but
I mean, what it also reminds me of, especially this language, is something that immediately comes to mind is like Aquino's book on black magic. I mean, it seems very much magical, or at least esoteric. I mean, the whole emphasis on ontology and performance, I think, the idea that, the world will match the word, as opposed to, words being descriptive, they're performative, they change the world. That's basically like, a spell.
Magic.
Basically that's the, most simple definition of magic. I mean, it can also be used as a paradigm of different types of ritual action, and, not all systems that have a concept of the performative power of language or of symbology to transform as Aquino would call it, the objective universe, use the word magic to describe that, and obviously they don't here, but it definitely reminds me more of that than of Maoism as far as I'm familiar with it. Definitely they seems like they had struggle sessions as well, but I don't know, that's not necessarily unique to Maoism either.
No, it's not.
Maybe he
and I
got
think,
that
I
idea
think
from
even,
like Christian missionaries,
Yeah, no, exactly. Well, I mean, I think these things can they're kind of best understood sometimes as social technologies that, like they can kind of, the ends to which they are deployed can change, but it doesn't change the fact that, basically it's a means of affecting a change in people and organizing groups of people. I'm just looking.
I mean, here's an article published in the Barbados Group Journal, Rhetoric and the Rise of Tribes, Using Organizational Alchemy. Why rhetoric is too powerful and had to be lobotomized. Rhetoric unlobotomized, transformation of terministic screens. And all of this stuff is about leadership. It's like creating an ontological science of leadership, basically. Like the defining principles of an effective healthcare leader. I wonder if this is used to clone Fauci. I guess not, because he's not effective. Or maybe he failed.
Program Fauci.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's been around forever. The last thing I'll read, just going back to, Earhart did study encounter therapy. I actually didn't know this, but the concept was developed by, I guess, a famous, I don't know if it was a psychologist, named J.L. Moreno in Vienna in 1914, and matured into what he called psychodrama therapy. But this is interesting. It was pioneered in the mid-1940s by Moreno's protege, Kurt Lewin, and his colleagues as a method of learning about human behavior and what became the National Training Laboratories, also known as the NTL Institute, that was created by the Office of Naval Research and the National Education Association in Bethel, Maine in 1947, first conceived as a research technique with a goal to change the standards, attitude, and behavior of individuals. The T group evolved into educational and treatment schemes for non-psychiatric patient people. A T group meeting does not have an explicit agenda, structure, or expressed goal. Under the guidance of a facilitator, the participants are encouraged to share emotional reactions, for example, anger, fear, warmth, or envy, that arise in response to their fellow participants' actions and statements. The emphasis is on sharing emotions, as opposed to judgments or conclusions. In this way, T group participants can learn how their words and actions trigger emotional responses in the people they communicate with. So that goes all the way back to the Office of Naval Research in 1947. Was, I guess, funding or created the first forays in the United States into this thing that would become encounter therapy and spread around like a hydra and stuff. So that I'm going to put a pin in that for later, but very interesting lineage of this shit.
Before we move on from Werner Erhard, there's just so much, and if we ever do an episode about him, we're going to obviously have more than we have time to say, even in the 4 hours of probably take on it. So I just want to read this one abstract, or a little bit of this abstract from one of the papers from their journal, which I guess was presented at, Werner Erhard contributed to it, Michael Jensen contributed to it, Steve Zaffron, who I guess works for Landmark Worldwide LLC.
That's the company that does Landmark for him today.
Yeah, and it seems like It was a Harvard NOM working paper, a Barbados group working paper, and presented at the IESE conference. So I don't know if that's related to this, but anyway, so this reminded me a little bit of something that we talked about a while ago. So he says, the abstract says, we present a model of integrity that, as we distinguish and define integrity, provides powerful access to increased performance for individuals, groups, organizations, and societies. Our model reveals the causal link between integrity and increased performance, quality of life, and value creation for all entities, and provide access to that causal link. Integrity is thus a factor of production as important as knowledge and technology, yet its major role in productivity and performance has been largely hidden or unnoticed. It's been occulted, or even ignored by economists and others. The philosophical discourse and common usage as reflected in dictionary definition leave an overlap and confusion among the four phenomena of integrity, morality, ethics, and legality. This overlap and confusion confound the four phenomena so that the efficacy and potential power of each is severely diminished. In this new model, we distinguish all four phenomena, integrity, morality, ethics, and legality, as existing within two separate realms. Integrity exists in a positive realm devoid of normative content. Integrity is thus not about good or bad, or right or wrong, or what should or should not be. Morality, ethics, and legality exist in a normative realm of virtues. That is, they are about good and bad, right and wrong, or what should or should not be. Furthermore, within their respective realms, each of the four phenomena is distinguished as belonging to a distinct and separate domain. The definition of each as a term is made clear, unambiguous, and non-overlapping. We distinguish the domain of integrity as the objective state or condition of an object, system, person, group, or organizational entity, and, consistent with the first two of the three dimensions in Webster's dictionary, define integrity as a state or condition of being whole, complete, unbroken, unimpaired, sound, perfect condition. We assert that integrity, the condition of being whole and complete, is a necessary condition for workability, and that the resultant level of workability determines the available opportunity for performance. Hence, the way we treat integrity in our model provides an unambiguous and accountable access to the opportunity for superior performance, no matter how one defines performance. For an individual, we distinguish integrity as a matter of that person's word being whole and complete. For a group or organizational entity, we define integrity as that group or organization's word being whole or complete. A group or organization's word consists of what is said between the people in that group or organization and what is said by or on behalf of the group or organization. In that context, we define integrity for an individual, group, or organization as honoring one's word. Oversimplifying somewhat, honoring your word, as we define it, means you either keep your word, or as soon as you know that you will not, you say that you will not be keeping your word to those who are counting on your word and clean up any mess you cause by not keeping your word. So, rather than read this entire long abstract, which goes on, he just says, in summary, we should defining integrity as honoring one's word, as we have defined, quote-unquote, honoring one's word, provides an unambiguous and actionable access to the opportunity for superior performance and competitive advantage at both the individual organizational level, and two, empowers the three virtue phenomena of morality, ethics, and legality. So basically, I mean, he does say that it will empower the separate virtue phenomena, but he did also kind of create a separate realm of integrity that's independent entirely from morality, ethics, and legality, which is all based on honor of one's word. W-Y-R-D. Oh yeah, that's a good point. I didn't even think of that. I mean, because it's pronounced weird, of course, but as we know. But the fact that it's all based on honor and integrity and independent of ethics, I'm like, getting a little bit of 09A vibes, the fixation with honor here.
Definitely, there's some dark...
A value independent, because that was something that was weird to me, that they were obsessed with honor. Just that's my pronunciation of the British spelling. But... because they obviously are opposed to any kind of virtue, but here you go. Here's a framework, it doesn't necessarily have to do with normative values at all. It's just about consistency.
I think if you scratch beneath the surface of a lot of California-y, new agey shit, you will find that idea lurking around there somewhere that, basically when you ask what is the meaning of morality or what is right and wrong, they say, well, it's all about harmony. Or something like that. They give a kind of wishy-washy answer. It's all about you, basically. It's all about you being I guess that's what they mean by integrity, is all the different parts of you are integrated. They're almost up a bunch of integralists.
They're integralists. Yeah, exactly. They're the ultimate integralists.
Yeah. But it's like we think of the common parlance of like integrity is very much tied in with ideas of morality and right and wrong.
As you said, that's a fallacy created by the dictionary,
Okay, gotcha.
That makes us think that integrity has to do with like, being moral and being good and upholding, principles. Like the idea of wholeness is in some way,
I don't think it's a
virtue,
coincidence that big corporations like Reebok and all these other companies have been sending their like C-suite executives to go to these seminars to basically, I think you could see a lot of these principles being used as like valuable tools for like not having, I don't know, psychological like anguish, like managing the personal like psychological contradictions of like working for a gigantic corporation, like an extremely alienated corporation that probably deals in like sweatshop labor and like all these other terrible things, like resource extraction, but kind of directs you back towards your own navel. And it's really just about you, and basically kind of internalizes the
making
problems.
Sure that if you're gonna break your word, you just say, "Oh, I won't be keeping my word." Okay.
Well, because it's all about honesty, right? It's like
exactly.
It's like this twist on honesty. Well, as long as you say you're like fucking somebody over, or breaking your promise to them, that's what matters. Because really, like bottling things up is not healthy.
It's basically about like keeping a consistent identity through all your insight roles. Just making sure that there's some kind of internal consistency going on that you can grasp onto.
When you self-hypnotize, you have to have a stable personality A, who can kind of like the master alter.
Yes, while you're shifting
the system.
Yeah, while you're shifting through your different positionalities of the scion of Anglo-Dutch settlers from 17th century, a Harvard law school professor, and above all, a Catholic, you need to be able to make sure that there's one organizing idea,
Yes, you do. Let's move on to number 2.
We'll come back to him. We're
definitely gonna. There's so much with him, but we'll come back to him. But speaking of brainwashing, do you want to read the second question here?
Yes, Sir Brainy asks, do y'all have strong thoughts on the resurgence of Maoism, especially amongst young people? Maoist Zoomers in China present a threat to empire. Maoists growing perennially in the U.S., Maoist parties in Philippines/MPA/Nepal. Honestly, I have not noticed like a resurgence of Maoism among young people. I'm not like a big like a China watcher or China head necessarily. So maybe that's a phenomenon going on in China that I'm not privy to. I don't think that's something that I've noticed in the United States, which, I consider myself to be a watcher of.
You haven't noticed it, at least on Twitter?
I've noticed, like, quote-unquote tankies on Twitter, but I don't know. I guess it's just, like, I haven't noticed that as being more of, like, a resurgence, I guess. I don't know. Maybe I guess it is a resurgence that there are more... But are there really more Maoists now than there were, like, in the, boomer generation or among Gen Xers? I feel like there are plenty of Maoist boomers, or at least nominally Maoist boomers.
I will say somebody who's, hung around in like paranoid tanky spaces on Twitter for some time, that I definitely noticed Maoism has been brought up more and is talked about more than like even maybe like 3 or 4 years ago. I feel like in the Trump era, some people kind of started, and I did kind of notice that Zoomers were particularly, like Zoomers and young millennials kind of were a little bit more like Mao curious than, say, like millennials and Gen Xers. And boomers, a lot of boomers became Maoists in the 70s. I think that's actually part of the reason why I didn't investigate, and apologies for speaking regardless, but but I do think that was part of why I never looked too closely into Maoism, because like my most direct contact with it was looking at like Western intellectuals that all kind of became Maoist for a few minutes in like the 60s and 70s, and also groups like, I'm thinking about years ago before I was fully like, I don't know, like paranoid pilled about a lot of aspects of the New Left, but I remember hearing like, oh, like the Weather Underground were like Maoists, or like the Symbionese Liberation Army was Maoists, and things like that. And so I always thought about it as kind of like a form of like ultra left like adventurism when it popped up in like France and in the United States and never really seemed to. And I guess the Avakianites were also kind of Maoists, like the Revcom people, who I would dip into revolution books in Berkeley back when I was a teenager, and they'd have a big portrait of Stalin and Mao on the wall, which in retrospect I'm kind of like, oh, it's kind of badass. But I think still, I remember talking at some kind of event. There were like Avakian people there a few years ago, and there's also something so complex with Maoism because the last great socialist country is China, and it has, I would say, deviated from like Maoism as it was practiced.
No investigation, no right to speak. They're 100%
I would say
perfect.
there definitely was some revisionism of Mao, and I would say that Mao, even though he is still revered as kind of a symbol in China, and you'll still see like his portrait in certain places, that Maoist thought, I think Dengist thought, is much more predominant than Maoist
by the way,
thought.
let's make sure we say dung. It's dung. We've been saying
dang.
We've gotten called out by it in a friendly manner, not in the manner we're going to get called out for saying anything bad about China by said Maoist Zoomers. I mean, I just generally don't. I do notice a certain trend among Zoomers of like China standing, where it's kind of this sort of Pollyanna-ish idea, or like I need to have like a hero, and obviously like. It's good to be like an anti-imperialist and to, not not broach like Western aggression towards China insofar as it manifests. I mean, we talked about before how like their economies are really very much integrated. I mean, I was just I was recently listening to Joe Biden giving an interview where they were like, what about the women of Afghanistan? He was like, come on, Jack, they're doing genocide in China. You're saying that we should invade China? Obviously, from his point, but like he obviously his whole thing was like, how ridiculous it would be if like every time something bad happened in the world we attack them. Like, are you saying that we should attack China? So it was like, from his in his rhetoric, something that was supposed to kind of like own this live journalist by being like, how outrageous would it be for us to go to war with China, but that's also, I think, something that's part of the same delusion of China's, socialist leadership and perfection. Not to say that there aren't admirable things about China and, good things that China has done. But I don't know. I just feel like it comes with sort of a naivete and a lack of like real worldliness, I think, a lot of the time. Like, I have like my sympathies like for, certain countries, and China, even as one of them, really. But in some respects, there's some things that I really don't like, such as the Xinjiang situation, even though we've talked about how there definitely are exaggerations that go around about that, but it's not the sort of complete and utter lie. There are certain things that they've just straight up admitted to, which I think would still be considered bad. At least I consider to be bad.
Sure.
I just don't see. I don't know. I don't have like an identity thing where I have to be like, my identity is bound up with this country. And like, I just, I guess because I have like my religion that I have to like be super bound up with and invested in. So that's like where I think people do that with states, and I think that
sure.
It's I think a little bit easier to do with religion. It's a bit more sustainable because we're talking about God here, not Z or she. Sorry,
isn't it she?
Yes, it's she.
Everyone's
Just like dung,
just
like shung. I'm
whatever.
Just doing these phonetics pronunciations, just like honor. I apologize.
But I do think
swarmed by the Maoist Zoomers.
I really do.
Just like what? Yeah. And Assad has never done any chemical attack ever. He's never ever.
The sarin attack was fake. But anyways, about Mao. Okay, like I think that Maoism is interesting. I'm starting to turn back around and like read a little bit more about. Well, like Mao's writings himself, and then also the various aspects of it and how it maybe like differed somewhat from the more like orthodox Marxist-Leninist, policies of like the Soviet Union at the time. And I've said before, I think that regardless of like who was right and who was wrong, the Sino-Soviet split was kind of a great tragedy for 20th century socialism.
Yes. As we
it
talked about in our
allowed
Victory episode. Very
yeah,
interesting
yeah,
stuff,
and by the
tragic book about
80s they
that.
were helping the Mujahideen and the head
United
of
States,
Chinese.
really. Like,
Well, yeah, I
you
mean,
know.
Bill Casey was flying to Beijing and hanging out with like the head of Chinese intelligence, getting drunk together and talking about how we're going to teach the Soviets a lesson. And I think, other places, I believe like there were just strange moves starting probably, I would say mostly in like the 1970s, like very, very late. Mao was probably already somewhat sidelined by that point, but certainly after he died, where like they would go into Angola and like give weapons to Jonas Savimbi, who the U.S. was supporting because the MPLA, the main Marxist revolutionary group in Angola, was backed by the Soviets. So they were like, well, like we want to fucking undermine the Soviet. Like, I don't know, just kind of stuff like that. That's like, is that really like stoking the global revolution and like, lifting everybody up when you're like making tactical alliances with the CIA all the time? Like, there's stuff like that. But it does make me think. It makes me re-question, and I kind of hadn't touched it in my head until some other interesting, like, smart people on Twitter kind of started talking about it more in the last like 2 years. But really, like, kind of what Mao was trying to do, and I think you could fairly say without directing malice at him that maybe he failed to do this, but in like the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution, that all we ever hear about it in the West is like, it failed. It was a miserable failure. They killed a bazillion trillion people, and it was absolute disaster. And eventually, like, Deng had to like take the reins away from Jiang Xing and Mao because like this crazy to paraphrase Adam first, this crazy cunt just decided because she couldn't be a movie star anymore that she wanted to punish everybody because she was an individualist, and that is why neoliberalism came to China. Like, just shut the fuck up, Adam Curtis. Sorry, I got like very triggered with that. But like, I think there's interesting shit there where like they were looking at how like the capitalist mindset was still ingrained in like the universities and like in the bourgeois class, which was not like totally wiped out after the Chinese Revolution, and how these attitudes and hierarchies and things like that it still stood as like a roadblock and also like a threat to like the restoration of capitalism. And I do think they were trying to find a way to like foster a kind of more I don't know, like sturdy socialist culture in their country. And, did they go too far in a few places? Did they make some mistakes? I'm sure they did. But I think it's interesting to look back on that because that was kind of like the high watermark in a way of this feeling that, communism was like kind of inexorably encroaching. And more countries in the global South were resisting like Western imperialism, and you had all these national liberation movements and stuff. And even Che, like we talked about in our last episode, was very interested in like moral incentives in like Cuban industry, and like not just but he said if moral incentives don't work, by all means we'll have to go back to material incentives. But I think he was right to maybe focus on just little things like he had pointed out, like just the decollectivization of farms in socialist Poland in like the late 50s, early 60s, like, and also I think the kind of hybrid system in Yugoslavia, I think he noted after he went there the first time, was like, well, this has been very economically productive and it seems to like work in a lot of ways, but he noticed a kind of mentality of like competition between like the different, farming firms or factories and stuff that were kind of like worker co-op armed. And he could kind of locate this like simmering capitalist mentality was still there and could pose potentially a threat because people weren't thinking in the way of basically like cooperating as a kind of social whole and things like that. So I think there's a lot there that like Mao, I mean, he wrote a ton of stuff, and I'm not a Mao expert, so I'm not going to pop off on like what was he right about, what was he wrong about. But I would separate him now in my mind as I'm going through reading different stuff. That I think things like the mass line, for example, were a really innovative concept, and that's why MIT and all these, Western institutions were kind of studying it, and it still kind of exists in a different form today, like that that like integralist article we read where they're kind of looking at like authoritarian China as kind of like like the mass line thing. It's a kind of like a feedback. It's like a cybernetic feedback system so that the party and the government don't get like too divorced from like what the people kind of want in real time. Like you can constantly check in and stuff. So I think there's like valuable concepts with that. And also I'm curious in like Maoism making it to the West in the 60s and 70s, and how that doesn't seem to have been a particularly successful or kind of right-on way to go for the New Left. And I think in the case of SLA, it was like they just slapped like a Maoist label on them because they were like constructed by the CIA. But, maybe the Weather Underground, also a little bit psyop-y. Cuomo just pardoned one of those guys who I realized his son is the DA of San Francisco now. Just like, you can't make this shit up.
Well, it's like a very different social context. It's kind of like, like the Juche Friendship Society in some ways, where like a lot of Juche is based on like the Korean people and their strength and like their solidarity. So it's like, well, what does Juche become about in the United States?
Yes, exactly.
So
and
it's the same thing, I think, when you kind of transfer out of these principles and I think that a lot of his insights were how to adapt the ideas of communism and Russian socialism to China.
Exactly. That's why he was basically kind of a classic Marxist-Leninist in that sense. And actually, this is why, like, as far as like, I don't go too hard on like fucking labels or put flags in my bio or anything, but I still kind of like politically would kind of describe myself as like a Marxist-Leninist, because Lenin's innovation to Marxist theory was basically that you have to adapt it to the particular conditions of the country that you're having the revolution in, and you need to adapt like kind of in a kind of scientific and like dialectical way, and basically the particular means by which you will like succeed. So that's why you saw like Che Guevara was like looking at how Cuba was a monocrop sugar economy that had all American parts. All the productive forces were like American things that now they were cut off from, and so that brought to bear certain kind of particular issues that it's not one size fits all. And that's why like Vietnam, like the National Liberation Front, and why Juche came about in the DPRK, and why Maoism is like the form of Marxism-Leninism. I mean, you hate to say it, but it's like Marxism-Leninism with like Chinese characteristics, or like Castroism is Marxism-Leninism with Cuban characteristics, etc. So I feel like when you're approaching like America, you do have to think very long and hard about like what even would be Marxism-Leninism with American characteristics, because we are still a nation state, and I mean, plenty of people have kind of written about that and stuff, but I feel like sometimes when you jump straight to like, we're gonna implement the kind of policies and tactics that Mao used in like rural China in the 1930s, or for that matter, Vladimir Lenin's tactics in, Petrograd in 1917, like it's obviously not going to fit. And I don't think somebody like Lenin or any of the other kind of classic Marxist-Leninists, except maybe Trotsky, would say that like you can just copy and paste the approach that you would take basically in like one country and then just like recreate it. So I think like when you look at the conditions of like Russia at the end of World War I, or China in the 1930s and 40s, or the DPRK at the end of World War II, like these are all very different situations than America finds itself in today. Though those are wartime situations, first of all. I think that's the most obvious thing, is that these revolutions succeeded out of an environment where the entire country was already caught up in a war. So, which also kind of, it tempers down the kind of like, they had guns and they were authoritarian, and bullshit like that. It's like, well, everybody was at war. Like, the Japanese were running around like raping and murdering everybody. Like, well, what the fuck do you expect?
Yes. And also every government has had like weapons and has been authoritarian, like in history.
Yes, governments are fucking authoritarian. Now, if you want to be like an
they
Anaprim,
involve, well, I guess insofar as they
know-
involve authority, I guess that authoritarian. I don't know. Again, we said this is like a meaningless word that basically just means like not American but involving authority.
Yeah. So I don't know. I don't even know enough about like kind of the different strains of like in the Philippines and like what is it, like Gonzaloism and stuff like that's going on in South America right now. And some of those kind of like insurgent movements that have been percolating for a long time are in Nepal. I know they have a big kind of Maoist movement there. I think maybe other people are also excited because there seem to still be like Maoist insurgencies in different parts of the global south, whereas I think there's less so. There really aren't any like Marxist-Leninist kind of insurgencies anymore. It seems like Maoism. But then ironically, you do have to wonder, like, I would not be shocked at all if they kind of weren't getting very much support at all from China. You know what I mean? Like, because China's like not interested in exporting Maoist insurgencies around the world. Like they'd rather export. Well, it's just like if they want to get influence.
I wonder. I certainly don't think that it is unrelated that China still exists and the Soviet Union, like, the People's Republic of China still exists and the Soviet Union doesn't. I don't think that those two facts are unrelated, that there are still Maoist insurgencies. And also, in places like the Philippines, they're still like within China's sphere relative to, for instance, like Russia. They're still like,
but correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of these Maoist groups are against China as it exists today.
I mean, I am not knowledgeable about it. I'm not necessarily saying that they're getting funded, but I don't know. Like,
but I mean, that's part of the paradox
that are like
of it, right?
anti-China, then I don't know.
I mean, like
anti-China.
I mean, like Revcom, just for
aggressively.
example, they're probably shot through with like feds and informants, like literally, but like they're very anti-China today, but like very down with Mao. So it's like this strange kind of thing where like the country that is still kind of in some way carrying on the traditions of Mao, like they're very against, and so it creates this like complicated kind of situation. But I don't want to speak too incorrectly. I don't know if every like Maoist party in the countries that Sir Brainy mentioned what their exact stance on China is, or what China's stance is towards them. But I do think it's interesting that it's coming back now, and I do think I have noticed Zoomers. Like I was talking to I remember meeting a Zoomer who's kind of like casually a communist like a few years ago, and she was just like, yeah, like I stand Mao. And I was just like, wait, what? And like older kind of Marxists or like academic-y kind of Marxists who were just like totally stuck on like all the 19th century writings and like theory and things like that, like they almost can't, like they don't know what to do with that because they've been so far divorced from kind of actually, I don't know, supporting like actually existing socialism. And Zoomers do seem to be more open to it because they totally did not live in even like the twilight of the Cold War. So for them, it's almost like another online identity to just be like, oh, Mao wanted to kill landlords? Based.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Kind of stuff like that.
Or it's edgy in some way where, like, as you said, like a lot of academics can get down with like Marxism. Like if Marxism is defined as being like sympathy with the 19th century writings of Marx, which are incredibly culturally influential, like in a way that is apolitical. Like they really just, they're used like for literary analysis, like, I mean, I guess that is in a way political, and I'm not saying that that's not, that Marxist analysis isn't Marxist or and it doesn't have a politics to it, but it's not the same as like, being part of a Red Brigade. Not that these Maoist Zoomers are part of that and aren't just online. I kind of feel like both those things are lame, honestly. Not to be like defeatist in any way, and not to discourage anybody from like following their heart if it's calling them to like, be part of a Maoist cell in the United States, but I don't know, I feel like some of the kind of Pollyanna-ish Zoomer enthusiasm for the CCP that I see, and also like the kind of just moribund like theory brain stuff is like, I don't know, it's equally uninspiring to me on the American end. but I don't know.
I get how you can feel that way. Yeah, I was much more likely when like the Hong Kong stuff protests were happening in 2019 to be much more of a critical defender of China. And was kind of thinking that, I mean, because, under Trump, like, he talks shit about China all the time, and seems like people like Pompeo and those kind of right-wing factions, going back to the John Birch Society, the first American intelligence officer murdered by the communist Chinese. I thought that maybe they were trying to start something, but to be honest, like, the COVID era has made me just kind of like, has left me wondering. And I'm not saying like, I'm not doing a Tucker and being like, they released it from the Wuhan lab on purpose to take down Trump or anything like that. But I still do think there are certain aspects of how they've gone along with the kind of lockdown paradigm and everything else. And I don't know. It just makes me a little,
it's interesting
like, not
that you
gonna lie,
say that,
sussed out.
because I actually have heard from some certain particularly vocal Maoist Zoomers that actually Xi and Trump were really good friends and they loved each other, and that actually the model for a Maoist insurgency in the United States should be the People's Republican Party, and that it's real, that's the message that I've gotten. I think actually that you're misinformed about Trump talking shit about China. They were actually best friends.
Have you been reading the Executive Intelligence Review?
No, I've been reading the dissident, the dissident formerly right on now Maoist on Twitter.
The Xiist, yeah.
Yes,
but I don't know. It's an interesting thing to keep an eye on.
I'm being
I do want to read more
but
Mao. I think Mao, in terms of like like the things he wrote about, like knowledge production, ontologies, and things like that are potentially very interesting on a kind of like applied philosophical level. So I do want to get around to reading more. And
I definitely get what you're saying about Hong Kong, where there are like certain things. I mean, I guess that I'm just like not in the right intersection for like some of this stuff where like, it's just gonna like, in terms of like the Falun Gong stuff, I don't know, like if maybe I had a different positionality, maybe I would feel differently. But like with the Falun Gong stuff, like I'm totally on board with the tankies. Like in terms of that, like, sus. That's bullshit. They're sus. But like, when you like ban Ramadan and like, you're like, oh, you have a beard, you're a terrorist. That to me is like, shut the fuck up, like back off. So,
can't
go with you on that
and
one.
even on that, like I've sort of I think my views have gotten a little more nuanced. Like it's hard to like reconcile the idea of like you're gonna hire Eric Prince to provide security against like Muslim extremists in Beijing. Like wait, what the fuck is happening? Yeah, so who really knows? But to be continued with it. The investigation and the right to speak are to be continued on that one.
Le Vietnam brûlait, moi je hurle Mao Mao. Johnson rigole et moi je vole Mao Mao. Le napalm coule et moi je roule Mao Mao. Les villes crèvent et moi je rêve Mao Mao. Les putains crient et moi je ris Mao Mao. Le riz est fou et moi je joue Mao Mao.
C'est le petit livre rouge qui fait que tout enfin bouge.
L'impérialisme dicte partout sa loi. La révolution n'est pas un dîner. La bomba est un tigre en papier. Les masses sont les véritables héros. Les ricains tuent et moi je mue Mao Mao. Les fous sont rois et moi je bois Mao Mao. Les bombes tonnent et moi je sonne Mao Mao. Les bébés fuient et moi je fuis Mao Mao.
I'll read the next question. J.S. Cutters, or J. Scutters. They ask, somewhat related to Thomas Pynchon and theory fiction, what are your thoughts on Bolaño? 2666 is definitely a book steeped in Dracularity. Have you read that?
No, I actually don't know very much about this author at all. I guess this book came out in 2004, so yeah, I could have taken note of it then, but I hadn't heard of it at the time. And lately I don't really read too many novels. Like I said earlier, the biggest occasion I would have to read one would be for the podcast. Like Soumission is one of the first novels I've read like in a long time, like fiction novels. Yeah, I think one day we'll do a Pynchon episode, so I'll read up on him for that. Maybe we could do a Bolaño episode. Do you know about him, Bolaño?
I don't know very much either. I've never read any of his novels. I do kind of remember when 2666 came out, or 2666.
Yeah,
didn't even notice that at first.
Dracular. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember like almost being tempted to buy it, but then kind of never really getting into it. I want to say, I don't know if he wrote any short stories, or I'm getting him mixed up with another very famous South American author. I definitely, it was like him or somebody else who I read some short stories about.
You're not thinking of Borges, are you?
I don't think I'm thinking of Borges.
Okay, so maybe.
It might be. There's like another name tumbling around in my head right now that I can't recall.
did write some short stories.
Yes, he did.
Which won literary prizes.
Yeah, and I know he was kind of on the left and was a supporter of Salvador Allende. He was Chilean, obviously, and was a supporter of Salvador Allende, got thrown in jail when Pinochet took over, and then I think eventually fled to Mexico and then to Spain for many years. I guess he was also became a Trotskyist in the 1960s. So, I mean, I kind of generally will give like a little more leeway to somebody who becomes a Trotskyist if they're like an artist, because it kind of makes sense. Like, you generally agree with like socialist, Marxist kind of principles, but you're also all about like the libidinal and rhetorical passion and like excitement of like the revolution. You know what I mean? Like, I think there's a certain vibe that's like very appealing, or was in the 20th century maybe. To and also, I don't know, if anyone's like Soviet phobic, then it's a kind of perfect branch for them. Sort of like maybe in the way that like Foucault would be a Maoist for a minute in like the 70s. It was kind of a trendy sort of thing. But I don't know. I mean, I think that the novel was heavily praised by Oprah when it came out.
Oprah?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, she was. She praised it in the Oprah magazine after she was given a copy of the translation before it was officially published, and it was considered the best novel of 2005. Yeah, or at least in Spain and Latin America it was, because it was written in Spanish. But yeah, I don't know much more. It does sound it's about a bunch of different things, like about like the femicides that were happening in Ciudad Juarez.
Right.
Yeah.
I'd seen that there is. It was kind of set in a fictionalized Juarez. That's interesting.
Yeah. And that was,
like a serial killer, right?
Yeah, and there was a whole thing like that really escalated, I think, even after this book came out, when the sort of the quote unquote like the proper like drug wars like kicked off, I think in like 2006, 2007. And yeah, there were like I think hundreds of women getting kidnapped and like murdered, and like it almost has it reminds me of, I think we should do an episode one day, but I think it was like the Matamoros cult in the 80s that abducted an American college student and sacrificed him in like a satanic ritual. And they were like this drug gang that was led by this like insane Cuban guy, or anti-Castro Cuban probably, who I think maybe died in like a police shootout in Mexico City eventually. But they had, I think when they raided their kind of remote ranch out by the borderlands between Texas and Mexico, they found like a bunch of different remains of bodies, like dozens that had been sacrificed. So, you know, for anybody that says, like, it never happens, like, nobody's ever sacrificed anybody to the devil.
That is not really a satanic murder, because it was bad, and Satan is actually good. So, if it was bad,
it was not approved by the South Texas Grotto leader.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
It
who
thus
was the Grotto?
Is not.
Yeah, exactly.
In that case, we do know who the Grotto leader was. But, yeah, it was like some real, like, Cobra shit, basically, but, like, real. And so I wonder if he gets into some of that stuff in his book. It also jumps around to like World War II and like the Eastern Front, and probably sounds like it has some occultiness. I guess
apparently
Henry Hitchens.
Dracula's castle is involved, so maybe that's where some of the Dracularity comes in.
Yeah, I see here in the Financial Times they wrote that it is a summative work, a grand recapitulation of the author's main concerns and motifs, as before Bolaño is preoccupied with parallel lives and secret histories, largely written after 9/11. The novel manifests a new emphasis on the dangerousness of the modern world. 2666 is an excruciatingly challenging novel in which Bolaño redraws the boundaries of fiction. It is not unique in blurring the margins between realism and fantasy, between documentary and invention, but it is bold in a way that few works really are. It kicks away the divide between playfulness and seriousness, and it reminds us that literature at its best inhabits what Bolaño, with a customary wink at his own pomposity, called the territory of risk. It takes us to places we might not wish to go. Yeah, okay, that's a pretty good advertisement to get me sucked into it. You know, I think whoever it maybe I assume it was him. Oh, you know what? I'm thinking of Gabriel Garcia Marquez. That's who I've read short stories of. Who also was 100 Years of Solitude. Exactly. So I think they were both running in similar like currents in Latin American literature of dealing with like I guess what's called like magical realism. That you know kind of had definitely when I was taking like English classes in the 2000s. That was kind of a big thing.
Very famous for magical realism. I hadn't heard Bolaño's name come up in connection with that, but yeah, I do remember, you know, of course, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, I think, is much more famous. At least he was at the time, maybe, because I remember reading him, on recommendations, you know, from people.
So interesting to check out. It sounds like there's some there's maybe some juicy stuff.
Quote from the translation. This I guess this character Reiter in the book, Hans Reiter, goes to Dracula's castle at one point. "What are you doing here at Dracula's castle?" asked the Baroness. "Serving the Reich," said Reiter, and for the first time he looked at her. He thought she was stunningly beautiful, much more so than when he had known her. A few steps from them, waiting, was General Entrescu, who couldn't stop smiling, and the young scholar Popescu, who more than once exclaimed, "Wonderful, wonderful," yet again the sword of fate severs the head from the hydra of chance. Soon they came, so later on, they take a tour of the castle, led by an SS officer. Soon they came to a crypt dug out of the rock. An iron gate with a coat of arms eroded by time barred the entrance. The SS officer, who behaved as if he owned the castle, took a key out of his pocket and let them in. Then he switched on a flashlight and they all ventured into the crypt, except for Reiter, who remained on guard at the door at the signal of one of the officers. So Reiter stood there, watching the stone stairs that led down to the dark and the desolate garden through which they had come, and the towers of the castle like two gray candles on a deserted altar. Then he felt for a cigarette in his jacket, lit it, and gazed at the gray sky, the distant valleys, and thought about the Baroness von Zumpf's face as the cigarette ash dropped to the ground, and little by little he fell asleep, leaning on the stone wall. Then he dreamed about the inside of the crypt. The stairs led down to an amphitheater only partially illuminated by the SS officer's flashlight. He dreamed that the visitors were all laughing, except for one of the general staff officers, who wept and searched for a place to hide. He dreamed that Honesch recited a poem by Wolfram von Eschenbach and then spat blood. He dreamed that among them they had agreed to eat the Baroness von Zump. He woke with a start and almost bolted down the stairs to confirm with his own eyes that nothing he had dreamed was real. When the visitors returned to the surface, anyone, even the least astute observer, could have seen that they were divided into two groups. Those who were pale when they emerged, as if they had glimpsed something momentous down below, and those who appeared with a half-smile sketched on their faces, as if they had just been reapprised of the naivete of the human race.
Yikes.
Interesting.
Yikes.
Yeah, we don't know what was inside. No.
That's some real Wevelsburg, Aquino kind of shit. Going on there. Okay, so that's very interesting. I'll put that on the to-read bookshelf. You know, in the fiction category. I think sometimes fiction can get at these things in a very complex way that, you know, wouldn't discourage anybody from reading that.
Yeah, I'd be interested to read it myself. Maybe at some point we will do a dive into that. It seems very pinchy, which, you know, is something that we've definitely been meaning to get into.
Yeah. Okay. Do you want to read the next question? Kind of a hard pivot from
hard
the
pivot.
arts.
Okay. Yeah. I'm curious to hear the host's opinions on the labor theory of value. Is it right? What is value? Does it even exist? What are the implications of its being right-wrong for historical materialism and the critique of political economy? What are the implications thereof for the SJ worldview more broadly? I get a sense that HistMat is an important model for both hosts understanding history, but I also can't help but notice that much of the podcast is about the broader cultural effects of ideas and subliminal communication. Are you bourgeois idealists? Defend yourself against these charges. All right. Oh, that's the Hague ICC, by the way. So, wow, these charges are really coming from high.
Yep.
So, I mean, the labor theory of value, I mean, certainly I think that, like, a labor theory of value is pretty indisputable, that, like, work produces, you know, things that often have, like, some kind of, that have an axiological, you know, status. I think that there's an axiological status to work pretty much universally, I would say. In terms of, like, the labor theory of value as formulated by Marx in particular, I mean, I don't know, like, I feel like the economy has kind of changed. I don't know, like, how I 100% feel about, I don't know. What do you think, Dimitri?
Yeah, I mean, quite a big old question to chew on, right? I mean, like, what do we think about the labor theory of value? There's been so much said about it. I tried to do some reading or commentary or whatever about it last night to kind of refresh myself on the different debates around it. I would say, from my admittedly, like, very subjective personal perspective, I feel like, because it can kind of be used. I found an interesting monthly review article that I think by an Italian Marxist economist that was, like, breaking down different aspects of, like, how it's seen. And I think he pointed an interesting distinction is, like, it kind of is a few things at once, or, like, to different people. Like, on the one hand, it's kind of a theory of exploitation, of how exploitation occurs, basically. And, like, to boil it down to, like, very, you know, reductive language, it's like the labor creates the value, and then, like, the difference between, like, the use value and then the exchange value in the market is pocketed by the capitalists who own the means of production, right? Does that sound about right? And I feel like, as a kind of, like, fundamental, like, theory of oppression, I generally agree with it. And I think it holds up in kind of your, like, if you just observe the actual economy. And then there's also the kind of distinction between it as a macroeconomic theory and then a microeconomic theory. And I think that, like, also as a kind of, actually, I think this writer even described it as a meta macroeconomic theory, which I kind of like. And I would say that on that meta level, on the kind of, like, the ontological explanatory power of, like, Marx's labor theory of value, I also ride pretty hard with, like, as a general overall, like, framework for, like, how the capitalist system works. Now, when you get into it as, like, a microeconomic theory, and you start to actually, like, formulate algorithms to, like, nail down, I think there were a lot of attempts to do this in terms of, like, how do you, like, establish a mechanism for the price discovery, like, the true value of, like, an economy, you know, of a commodity. I think you start to get in, like, very, like, tricky territory, even under, like, more classical industrial capitalism. And now today, I feel like there are so many layers of, like, mystification layered on top of, like, the core structure of capitalism, which still kind of functions more or less in the dynamics that were laid out by, like, Marx and Engels, that I don't necessarily think it's, like, the alpha and omega. I get a little bit frustrated when I see people who identify as Marxist, like, really honing in on the labor theory of value, like, talking about it to death, and then feeling like nothing is real socialism unless, like, it validates, like, the labor theory. Like, if you don't abolish the commodity form, like, you're not socialist. And it's like, okay, that's an interesting debate to have, but I'm a little more, you know, I was just talking shit about Trotskyists for being, like, kind of, like, emotionally, like, kind of driven by, like, their passions and, like, their almost, like, from an artist standpoint. But, like, I do kind of have, like, a fucking arts background, so, like, I kind of do approach it as, like, I don't know, from, like, I don't know. So I feel like getting into, like, the thorniness of the mathematical thorniness of, like, building an alternative structure that does, like, automatically distribute the exact, like, you know, use of, like, necessary labor time for a commodity. I wouldn't poo-poo anybody for doing it, but I think the idea that you need to figure all that out before you can start using kind of Marxist heuristics in a kind of actionable way in the world, I think is kind of like a mistaken, like overly academic brained way of going about it, because I don't think you're ever going to just like find the algorithm or something. Then like,
right, yeah,
it's so
like,
complex, it's so abstract, and I'm not a. I'm very much like a verbal brain person, basically, and not a like, But I think also like what appeals to me about like the power of Marx and like the people in his tradition is that they break down these very abstract, like very complicated phenomena, like economic phenomena, into like language that you can not only like grasp as like a normal person, but then kind of use it to go out in the world and actually like struggle for power or struggle against like the capitalist class, which I think at the end of the day is like, if I don't know.
I mean, I do think that at this point, like a lot of the stuff in Capital about the nitty-gritty of the labor theory of value is, I mean, let's just be real, like it's not accessible to, like it's difficult to understand, like it requires like hard work. It's dense and extremely like complicated, and I think that what you said again, like I did not do like a refresher on Capital before taking on this question. This is an example of us not like doing thorough research to prepare for all these episodes. But what you say when you say it's many things to many people, that strikes me as intuitively correct, and that I don't even think that did Marx even use the term the labor theory of value.
I think there's a certain level of dispute over that, to what extent he even advocated this as like, this is the alternative like model that we should be. I mean, I think Adam Smith used it before Marx, and maybe even Ricardo. So it's not just a Marxian
that's like
concept,
there's a whole like debate of like, well, of course it's not, because like when you get to, like you said, the macroeconomic level, it's almost axiomatic. Like I've heard like, oh, Ibn Khaldun, invented the labor theory of value because he said that labor it creates value. Let me see. According to Ibn Khaldun, labor is a source of value. He gave a detailed account of his labor theory of value, presenting it for the first time in history. This is from Ibrahim M. Owais. Ibn Khaldun's contribution was later picked up by David Hume in Political Discourses. It is worth noting that Ibn Khaldun never called it a theory, but had skillfully presented it in, his Muqaddimah, his introduction to his history. Like what it comes down to, I won't read this entire thing just for the length of the episode, but basically like the idea that labor creates value. Ibn Khaldun divided all earnings into two categories: rib, gross earning, and kasb, earning a living. Rib is earned when a man works for himself and sells his objects to others. Here the value must include the cost of raw material and natural resources. Kasb is earned when a man works for himself. Most translators of Ibn Khaldun have made a common mistake in their understanding of rib. Rib may either mean a profit or a gross earning, depending on the context. So like some of the stuff is like on a certain level, like pretty intuitive. In fact,
that's the word I would use, is like it makes an intuitive amount of sense.
Yes, like on a macro level, and like that doesn't necessarily originate with Marx, the association between like the axiological association between work and value. I think that like, work is basically energy, and energy creates change, and change, I don't know, maybe is a form of value. I mean, this is all very like out in space, but excuse me, yeah, it's vulgar. But you know what? I really don't. I mean, we're just gonna get like mobbed by like a million different factions of Marxists after this episode. Thanks for the questions, guys.
Anyway,
thanks for like laying this minefield for us to walk into. But I do think that in terms of like the bourgeois idealism thing, one thing that I've said many times about Marx, but I'll reiterate, is that I think that a lot of the stuff is built upon ideas, and like really the like theatrical, to go back to the ontology of performance from Werner Erhard, the like whole idea of, which is so essential to like his formulation of how, what you mentioned, like deconstructing the commodity form, the idea of commodity fetishism, which I find to be a bit of a problematic formulation anyway. Like that really is based on like the idea of character masks, or like the commodity coming on stage as a thing, like before it is not, but when it enters onto the stage, it becomes something, like that whole idea, the table becoming alive, like that.
Yeah,
that
the
type
Disney
of, like,
brooms dancing.
Exactly, the dancing Disney brooms. And, like, all of that stuff, like, there isn't really an explanation of the commodity form that doesn't use that metaphor. In fact, he says it's necessary to draw an analogy to, like, the misty world of religion in order to make this understandable or intelligible. He says that's, needed. So... I think that, like, there really isn't a formulation of commodity fetishism. It doesn't depend upon these allegories and metaphors or idealizations. And I don't know, like, I mean, one of my most fundamental takes on Marx and Capital is that it's more idealistic, perhaps. But I mean, I wouldn't necessarily use that I don't mean that in the sense of, idealistic, like utopian. I mean, in the sense of, like, quote-unquote bourgeois idealism, but maybe I would not mean that in the pejorative way either. I don't think that giving attention to the material effects of ideas, the power of words to change the world, or something like that. It's
I think sometimes it gets like mistaken because everyone from Marx to Engels to Lenin and so on like loved railing, and often I think appropriately loved railing against like bourgeois idealism and utopianism and things like that. But I think even with all that being true, these were people that spent probably in Marx's cases his entire career. In the case of Lenin, like up until really the last like 5 years of his life, mostly writing articles and books and arguing with people, basically using language and ideas to promote what he believed in. Now, I think that what these these Marxist revolutionaries that did succeed, it was they ended up kind of taking action on behalf of their words, but also it's like, I don't know, like, you know what I mean? Like, I think that they backed up their words with actions, or they attempted to implement their ideas in reality, in the material world. But I still think there's an aspect of, like, ideation, like, even putting aside, like, idealism as a pejorative or anything like that. Like, ideas clearly are a part of this whole system of human society, like the propagation of ideas, the advancing of ideas, and things like that. I mean, if it really wasn't, then like I guess no Marxist would be on Twitter, because what's the point? Yeah, so I think it's almost like so obvious that we do use ideas and kind of I don't know, philosophical warfare and debate and things like that, and agitation on a kind of like philosophical and political level. That is obviously a critical part of like the Marxist tradition, but I think what kind of people like maybe Lenin were pointing out was to like just sit around and talk and then never want to actually do anything does become kind of a form of like idealism, or just like we want to run like a DSA candidate.
Well,
or something.
I also think like I mean, I think that it really was like, an actual ontological debate, not in like the broad sense of ontological that might sometimes slip out, but actually it is ontological in that it was about like what was like had ontological priority, what had foremost reality. Like I think that they were responding to like Hegelian idealism, which was really like the idea that like there is like a thought. I mean, this really becomes like something that it has to do with theology in a certain way. Hegelianism is very theological. Basically, like the transcendental Geist, or like the world spirit. I can understand like one could definitely readily understand the Marxian critique of this, because it is basically the idea that there is this transcendental Geist that is like the driving force of the movement of history. And Marxism and Marx, actually I would just say Marx before like making any claim about Marxism, though I think many Marxists also, critique that notion and say that no, the world is driven by, this idea of, the idea of matter, but I myself and I think, I don't know, maybe I am a little bit of a Hegelian in certain ways. I think that there's certain misreadings maybe of Hegel that come out, but I just don't like this kind of sharp distinction. I mean, we're kind of addressing ourselves. I'm addressing myself, I guess, to vulgar concepts of both, where this distinction is being drawn. So I'm giving maybe a vulgar response, but the whole idea of like, oh, it's all material, or it's all like, an idea enacting itself through, Aufheben or whatever through history. I don't think that either of those things are like the most satisfactory explanation. I think that both have a certain truth to them. I mean, just like, here's an example of, this is like just from chapter 1 of Capital, right? Like, I think this is an interesting part. And I think this attests to, this is of course in translation, but, a lot of people don't read German, and you can see how dense it is, but also you can see some of what I think, we've been kind of talking about. In the production of the coat, human labor power in the shape of tailoring must have been actually expended. Human labor is therefore accumulated in it. In this aspect, the coat is a depository of value, but though worn to a thread, it does not let this fact show through. And as equivalent of the linen in the value equation, it exists under this aspect alone, counts therefore as embodied value, as a body that is value. A, for instance, cannot be your majesty to B, unless at the same time majesty in B's eyes assumes the bodily form of A, and what is more, with every new father of the people, changes its features, hair, and many other things besides. Hence, in the value equation, in which the coat is the equivalent of the linen, the coat officiates as the form of value. The value of the commodity linen is expressed by the bodily form of the commodity coat, the value of one by the use value of the other. And as a use value, the linen is something palpably different from the coat. As value, it is the same as the coat, and now has the appearance of a coat. Thus, the linen acquires a value form different from its physical form. The fact that it is a value is made manifest by its equality with the coat, just as a sheep's nature of a Christian is shown in his resemblance to the Lamb of God. So, I think that most of that, to some will be relatively straightforward and easy to parse. I think that others may have some difficulty with it, certainly hearing it read, I think that if you're listening to an audiobook of that, some might have to rewind to be honest, I think that you can definitely see, for instance, in the idea of kingship that he brings up, when he says A cannot be your majesty to B unless at some time majesty in B's eyes assumes the bodily form of A, but it changes, right? It changes, the idea of your majesty takes on new features, right? So the value form is the form of the king, and then, the body actually changes, that is embodying that value. But that's a very lofty concept, and the idea of simply making something like that go away, like majesty, an idea of charismatic authority. I think that it's natural, we're Americans, we have a Republican impulse, but even in America we have a president, an executive that definitely has an aura of majesty around him, that accrues to him.
POTUS. I mean, literally the Latin, I think it's one of the Latin derivatives for power. It or it at least closely echoes the
idea, potens.
Right? It echoes the Latin for
yes.
For power. Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
So,
and,
Yeah,
the president, he presides, but...
Yeah, but also, if you just look at jumping up to what are the implications for the SJ worldview and historical.
Certainly none of the
stuff.
actual existing socialism got away from maybe got away from the office of king per se, but they didn't get away from the idea of majesty or fathers of the people.
No, they didn't. They didn't.
Did
I forget what book I heard people talking about on a podcast a while back. Maybe I've mentioned this before, but about the sort of the cult of personality around Stalin, and how actually it wasn't necessarily started by Stalin because he was a megalomaniacal sicko, but it was other people below him in the party that were trying to kind of enhance outreach into the in the rural peasant populations where there was still high illiteracy. That was eliminated, of course, within 20 years. But at the time, you couldn't just go in with a bunch of new atheists Bolshevik kind of missionaries and just explain to them Das Kapital and have them understand it. So what some people ended up doing was, hey, remember how the Tsar used to have these like marches through the villages, and people would hold up these icons with the picture of the Tsar on it, and people would kind of venerate it and stuff. Well, like, what if we adopted that technology, but like put Stalin on it and make Stalin kind of like the symbol, the father of the people that the Tsar used to be? And, you know, of course, all kinds of people could attack that for like, they're just perpetuating Tsarist tyranny, like it's the same. But that was kind of the root of where the idea of like having big like banners of like Stalin everywhere. And honestly, I mean, Lenin, because it was that era of the government after he died that made Lenin into like the meme of like the USSR and kind of like the spirit, like almost like the spiritual father of the country. And to say that there's absolutely no kind of I don't know, that there's no kind of spiritual, social, psychological, like complex phenomenon with that in terms of like how you organize and motivate a society, or, you know, even like Comandante Che on a t-shirt, you know, in Cuba, that image still means something. And, you know, even though he was an atheist and Lenin was an atheist. So I think that maybe we're trying to like dig a little deeper, because there are like these dynamics of human society and things like, and these like social technologies that, yeah, can like, that do have a certain power and they have a certain relevance. And also, I mean, I don't know, like I've always felt, and maybe this is idealistic in the sense of being too optimistic for me, but I've always felt like if you can enlighten people to certain quote unquote conspiracy theories, and you present it in like a materialistic way, generally speaking, and provide the context for why it happened, you actually stand kind of a good chance of like radicalizing people towards like the types of arguments that Marx is making in Capital about the labor theory of value, because there's so much basically, you know, social conditioning going on in American society to make people not even think about the idea, even just the most base kind of assumption of like the Marxist labor theory of value, that laborers create the value and then the capitalist basically takes it to the market and sells it for more than it costs to produce, and then pockets most of the profits, and then uses that and then through that process aggrandizes their own power so that they can basically subject the workers to a position of no power, where, you know, basically, I mean, Marx, I think, accurately described, like, the reserve army of labor, like, never paying higher wages than you absolutely have to keep people, extending the workday beyond the necessary labor time to create a certain commodity, like the relentless drive for maximization of profit at all times. And to do that, you have to basically establish deeper control over your workforce. You can't give them, quote unquote, rights, basically. And so I think, like, if I don't know, I just think that, like, the way I just described it, I feel like I feel like every American understands, like, buy it for $1, sell it for $2. Like, that kind of basic dynamic. And it's like, well, that's what capitalists are doing, but with all of our labor. They're buying our labor power, and they're selling the product of it, like the raw materials plus the labor power, which creates a certain level of use value. And then they sell it for a certain exchange value on the market that is higher than that. And then, you know, they take the profit. Now, I don't know, maybe that's too vulgar, and I hope that doesn't make it sound like I'm like Richard Wolff just saying, like, there should be worker-owned co-ops, and then the Mondragon Corporation. That's real Marxism.
There's nothing new under the sun at the Hegelian dialectic where you'll vote for anything just to make Antifa stop. But
yeah, but also, like, I mean, talk about like mind war, like propaganda, like manipulation of information people get. Like, obviously these things play a part in the superstructure and
in
like,
Marx's
have
analysis,
a material
I
impact.
think, as well. Yeah, exactly. And I think that, like, well, just kind of the format of the question of, like, are you bourgeois idealists? Like, you know, I mean, I know it's facetious, like, I'm not that oblivious to sarcasm, but, you know, the idea that, like, oh, you know, by discussing this and talking about, quote, the broader cultural effects of ideas and subliminal communication, I mean, Marx kind of did that as well, you know, he saw that as being a very big feature of society.
The bourgeois mystification of everything is like critical
and even how,
to
like
the maintenance of capitalism.
Yeah,
like, you have to lie to everybody.
and how the disjunction between like the actual value and the the use value and its value of a commodity, how that disjunction happens. That's kind of the nature of commodity fetishism. So, I think that Marx's analysis and his ideas, and he stands on the shoulders of giants. There are definitely many who have come before, perhaps, literal giants. But I think that, his analysis, like when people are like, oh, in order to realize like Marxism or to be like good Marxists, we have to get rid of ideas or like we have to like just be like completely like I don't even think people like, because the idea of materialism, like again, like many things in Marx, like how well, how doctrinaire are they, how like how formalized are like these concepts, like it's much more complex than that. Like in most intellectualist bodies of work, like these concepts kind of like shift around when it becomes something like, you're talking about gin, you're not, a materialist or something. Like, well,
I mean, we already went through how
the
like
out there, like if you're
we already did a whole
episode
on like Soviet parapsychology research. So like, are we the non-Marxist when like the Soviet government was looking at this shit pretty extensively?
Yeah, that's true.
It
comes down to the like
they
the
were
supernatural
scientific
versus
materialists.
natural aspect. It comes back to the supernatural versus natural dialectic, which is kind of a vain distinction where they obviously would say like, well, psychic phenomena, if they exist, like are part of the material reality, but in terms of and I think that ideas do have a materiality to them. I think that affect does have a certain could be considered to have a materiality to it. Maybe that is very bourgeois or trendy, but I do believe that is true, that there is a certain materiality to the way that emotions can travel. I think that there is or emotions, feelings, and subtle energies. I think that when a blood sacrifice is performed, like a human life is destroyed in a ritual or any context, there can be a release of energy that is material. So I don't know. I mean, this is a long tangent. I don't know if we defended ourselves. I think if we maybe even dug ourselves deeper into the whole being bourgeois idealist, but I'm satisfied with my comments.
The last thing I'll say is that the mystification around how value is created and exchanged is kind of the original psyop of the capitalist paradigm that permeates everything, the mystification.
Yes, he was very much a believer in psyops, Marx. He was very much about he would be he was very anti-religious, despite maybe some revisionist readings of his famous opiate quote. He was very down on kind of the religious justifications or the ideological justifications of capitalism, and he saw basically them as being psyops. I think we talked in one of our episodes about his essay on the 18th Brumaire of Napoleon III. Right, where he goes deeply into this as kind of dialectic with Stirner as mediated by Derrida. Sorry, I briefly interrupted you. You can
no, really. I mean, and even you go to Lenin in World War I, calling out all the socialist parties in Europe for pulling an AOC and being oh, we have to support our national governments right now, and basically saying you're all full of shit. You're all renegades like Kautsky, and the only position should be to hope for the defeat of all these powers and all the soldiers uniting together to overthrow these sicko monarchs who are all first cousins. It's that explanatory, that just calling out, and I guess I hesitate to call it heretical kind of tradition of calling out the bullshit, but I feel that's one of the things that first attracted me to a lot of these writers and revolutionaries in the Marxist tradition was the refusal to be fooled and to call out in kind of clear words the explanatory power of these theories, even when they're just in a broad sense. They don't have to all get into the ultra nitty-gritty about which algorithm fully nails the labor theory of value, blah blah blah. It's really, I think, as a theory of exploitation and a kind of ontology of understanding how power works, I think we want to be clear here that like we're not talking about like a one shadowy cabal. It's like running everything in the world.
If we can just
but we're also
figure out
not saying
who
there's
it
a
is,
faceless
then,
maw.
It's also not.
Yeah, it's not just like if we just find out like the 10
who is in
sickos.
charge of everything. Yeah, who has done every conspiracy? Who is it? Who?
No. This is like a multi-nodal kind of dynamic system with different players, but I think like still the category used by Marx and his adherents of like the capitalist ruling class is still a pretty functionally kind of accurate and like useful category. Like the people that own the capital, that call the shots, that own the productive forces are the people that are more or less in the driving seat. And, you know, do they also believe in like Freemasonic mystery religions and like do other shit like that? Well, some of them do, apparently. They're all hanging out with Epstein in his fucking Sun Temple. So, you know, even if they're not real, I should stress that too, even if it's not real at all, if they believe in it, it's worth paying attention to, because who knows the mechanisms by which like that has an effect on people. Like, I mean, just think about like a bunch of psychopathic rich people like human sacrificing somebody and like, you know, somewhere in the Virgin Islands, like even if there's like no such thing as a spirit world, there's no God, nothing else, like that has an impact on us. That matters. You know what I mean? Like even if like regardless of like what they think they're getting from it, I would guarantee it's not going to be good. And if they have disproportionate power to like create policy and make economic moves that affect all of our lives and shape our society, then that is kind of relevant, and it kind of is a little beside the point.
On the,
if it's like
maybe I'm just getting triggered because I'm, you know, so on the Sirat al-Mustaqim by you saying, you know, even if there's no God. But to me, like, this really is touching on the like third rail of materialism versus like quote unquote idealism. Because to me, like, just hearing that out loud, like, is so patently ridiculous. Like the scenario, the idea, like, oh, you know, what does it matter? And I say that very emphatically, like, you know, the connotation of materialism. What does it matter for you to come and say like, it's not real? Like, it is real, because reality is manifested by, you know, this is where I feel like these, like, I don't know, it's very complicated. You know, something distracted me in my immediate environment, but I think that the way that these concepts work, like when you talk about quote unquote like a spirit world, you know, for one, a spirit world obviously be integrated with our world, and like when we talk about like God is a name for something that it's very, I think I find very difficult to take seriously arguments that what God is a name for does not exist. You can get into the specifics, but, and like, you know, I think that the type of existence that a spirit world would have is the type of existence that is already pretty much established by human beings' relationship with it. I don't know if that makes sense to people. I hope it does. But like human beings' relationships with the spirit world already like basically constitutes the like reality of the spirit world. And like the whole like hand-wringing of...
You're saying that even if it's like this very complex, subtle kind of method of like psychological self-projection that has an impact on us, but it's like really all like kind of psychosomatic, it has a real enough impact that like even if that is the explanation, it has a reality in terms of like its impact on people.
Yeah, like, well,
so
I mean,
might as well. So it's kind of like,
if
what's
it's
the point?
just this, it's just like, you know, the whole thing
saying
of like,
it's fake.
Exactly, saying it's fake. The whole thing of it's just this, it's just that. You know, we've used this example many times. It's a good stock example is demon possession. You could even say an alien abduction. You know, if someone experiences this happening, like for you to say that, oh, you know, this is because you have this like brain abnormality or whatever like epistemological framework you want to like put it in or something, that to me is not material. Like, what is material is like the experience and like the reality of the phenomena and its effect on the person and thus on the world. And like whether, you know, even things that only one person can see and another person can't, they're not less real than things that, you know, other people, like, in my opinion, like, I do not think that, according to my, like, ontological framework, I do not think that those things are less real. That's separate from the question of God, which I just feel like you cannot have a concept of reality, period, without God. Like the whole idea of reality that is framing this entire conversation, that is another name for what God is. But anyway, I was going to say before, I was somewhat triggered by like this kind of attempting to sort of like, throw a bone to the people
I was
who
trying
are,
to throw
upset.
a bone to the
I know you were, but I don't want to throw a
listeners,
bone to those people because they just need to get on board with the gin that are out there. No, but, I'm joking a little bit, but I just think that like, that approach has, this is what I'll say, like, this actually dovetails into what I was going to say, is that Marx's responses to Stirner actually are, like, perhaps an interesting, or provide an interesting approach to some modern-day Marxists, because Stirner's whole thing, as he's famous for, among some people who get memed into being, like, egoists or whatever, is that everything was a spook, right? Religion's a spook, this is a spook, the only thing that's real is, my ego, like me. And Marx very astutely pointed out, like, that your ego, this I, is the ultimate spook. That's like the ultimate, phantom, that ideal that you've conjured up, But I think that could be said about some modern day Marxist idea of materialism, is that their idea of what materialism is may be a bit of a phantom, You
mean if they're like a vulgar materialist? Or like a hardcore materialist that is just like...
Well, yeah, maybe a vulgar materialist or, certain frameworks about materialism. People who are like, materialism is about, like, how, I don't know, whatever. Like, whatever people think materialism is. Like, we have to believe in, trust the science, etc. Like, gin aren't real. Like, stop being, whatever. We got the
exactly.
the
Ermies.
The greatest threat to, the greatest threat to socialism is... religion or the Taliban or, whatever. We need to, go back in there. Or
conspiracy thinking. I've heard that bandied about lately. That, the left really needs to, like, hold the line on not getting sucked into crazy conspiracy theories.
That's ultimately,
like
that's
Marxism.
also, like, idealistic because it's all about broad social forces. Like, there's a great example. The Ma, the faceless Ma. That is like a personification, like an allegory, like an idea, an image of force, like that basically is shaitan, or a shaitan is the faceless Ma. That is, very, very different from, like, I think that's much more like of an idealistic formulation than saying, like, such and such group of people implemented this plot. But people will say, because of their idea of what materialism is, that, like, it's actually more idealistic to say that, like, this group implemented this plot secretly than to say that everything is because of the churning maw of capital.
That's actually a good point. Let's flip it on its head right here.
The Cthulhu
people who
that
say
is capitalism, like, that is really,
I'm gonna rescue us out of this ditch by flipping
I don't think
everything on its head.
that's possible. We've dug
People
all the
that
way
say,
down to the hollow earth now.
No, straight up, like, people that say that the faceless maw of capitalism is like what produces everything in the world, and there are never conspiracies of actual people, and it doesn't actually matter what they do. Like, basically, like, capitalism would just keep going if there were no people. They are the bourgeois idealists. They are the idealists.
I agree with you. I very much.
Yes.
That's exactly the point.
They are the
that I've been trying to make in
non-materialists
this
because
long
they are
discursive
saying,
rant.
like, Satan, fucking, like, basically, like, the satanic, like, invisible hand, but they're also not saying Satan. So they're really putting themselves
what
out
I'm
on a
saying,
limb.
I'm also saying they need to just, like, accept the fact that they already believe in Satan and come on board to the woke satanic panic.
True.
open.
And that Satan has his
welcome.
minions.
Yes, he has his
he speaks
minions.
into the hearts of mankind. And,
yes, exactly.
Yeah, so, like, I mean, that's the thing. Like, none of these processes that Marx would describe would happen without human actors enacting them in the world. So or having the idea to enact them in the world. And of course, like that happens through a very complex socialization process, right? Like I wouldn't chalk it up to like human nature, some pessimistic bullshit like that. But, I mean, that's why they send all their boys to Groton and Phillips Exeter and Yale and have them line the coffin at the Skull and Bones crypt and get peed on, for the rest of their lives so that they can be inducted into this kind of like weird mystery religion of like international capitalism, which I'm not saying it's literally a religion, but they get kind of indoctrinated into it and then end up being the vessels through which it perpetuates itself in the world. And that involves conspiring, like a systemic level of conspiracy on multiple levels, probably like all the time. Like there's constant conspiracism going on within the capitalist system.
Yeah, there's something idealistic. I mean, like I say this facetiously, sarcastically, what I really mean to say is that capitalism is incredibly full of ideas and invisible. It works based on belief in many cases. As we said before, like stocks rise and fall based on trust, confidence, iman. On belief.
Yeah, it's like the guy who turned over like Che's like comrades in Bolivia, being like, the army came around here and they said that communists are just gonna like put us all in gray jumpsuits and like steal our families and like make us slaves. And I love freedom. And it's like, okay, well, like these guys just came in like psyoped this like peasant farmer and lied to him, basically. Like they successfully psyoped him to it's like Che Guevara constantly talked about how like you need to, even if it means not erming people for believing in a witch bird, you have to factor these things in because like human affinity, like social feelings, like all these things like matter. And it's not just like economic output or like some kind of random thing like that, or it's not a system that's on autopilot. Like you need real strategists and shit, basically to plot and plan, especially when you have like competing, factions or systems like trying to supersede you. The 20th century was like a real zenith of like competition. And I mean, it doesn't stop. Like capitalism like lives to compete. It's like in a competitive framework. And
again, like,
so
yeah,
it needs to defend
we're
itself
personifying
and expand
even now.
and everything.
It defends itself. It has an invisible hand. We live in a world where corporations like are considered to be people with rights.
Yes.
What does that even mean? Like,
True.
The whole idea of like personhood is like thrown into absolute chaos like by that, but we just like accept it as a
right.
feature.
We're ruled by these tulpas now, these registered in Delaware fucking tulpas. So I think that's also like the just as Marx is using like this allegorical language to help like explain these concepts in a more lively, like comprehensible way. That's why we would call like the modern corporation like a tulpa. And like I'm not necessarily like meaning that literally, though. I don't know. At the same time, it's kind of like it's a fun thing to think about, or the idea that the invisible hand is kind of like Satan or something like that. It's like I'm not necessarily saying that in like a literal way, but if we are going to call capitalism it and just talk about it like it has its own will and it's like floating around in the ether, like basically influencing everybody in like this very like indirect structural way, then it's kind of like you can't have it both ways. Like either embrace calling it satanic, as at least as an allegory, or I don't know, or start admitting that real like business people and do conspiracies, which they fucking do.
To me, this is another false thing, like of allegory versus allegory really is like a literary term, and. A lot of my ontology is based on like the Quran, which is a book and talks about allegory, and something that I've mentioned elsewhere, maybe on this podcast, maybe on others, is that maybe on You Can't Win, talking to Tom, in the Quran, Allah will use the term ayat to refer to, signs in nature, and but the term ayat is also used for verses in the Quran. I think that the world in some way, like the phenomenal world, has the nature of creation, which is, bound in our experience of it. We process things through the layer of our body. That is inescapable thing that our world is mediated by our body. You know, there's a cone of silence in the chorus, and everything comes in through the sort of screen of our perceptions of our flesh, you know, as perhaps Merleau-Ponty would say. And I think that, you know, to say like, oh, Shaitan is an allegory, like, or he's real, like, I don't know, I feel like he's both and, maybe, you know, maybe, like, if we think about those things as being, you know, like, constructs or creations that have a certain art to them, just like the way the world could have, like, signs and symbols and meanings embedded in it, then that's, like, a way to understand those things. I mean, this is, like, you know, something that, you know, two things that are very traditionally incompatible, but I think that, like, as we talked about before, it is a big blind spot in, like, for anyone to be like, oh, you know, step one to Marxism, or a necessary step to, like, achieving my revolutionary goals is to get rid of all idealism, and that includes people who believe in God or witchbirds or what have you. You know, like, you need to have the humility to consider that you might be wrong about the witchbird, and there may in fact be a witchbird. Otherwise,
I and Shay agree with you.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
My angel, you're always near. My angel, you're all I fear. The silent clouds tell me that something's wrong. They're moving toward me and it won't be long. I try to run but my body's frozen over. But I won't be afraid. Oh, I won't be and I don't believe when you say you even love me. But I won't be afraid. Oh, I won't be and I don't believe when you say you even love
I'll read the next question from Nady or Natty. They ask, any thoughts on the notion that Lady Gaga killed Lena Morgana as a money ritual in order to jumpstart her rise to stardom? Did she use bourgeois showbiz magic to steal Morgana's talent, aesthetic, and sound? There's a lot of dracularity surrounding the whole thing. This video looks like a deleted scene from Inland Empire. They posted Lena Morgana singing My Angel, an old YouTube video. My follow-up question would be, do you have any thoughts on money ritual and or vampiric celebrity talent theft as a practice more generally? All caps. Did Salieri kill Mozart? Well, putting aside that question for a second, are you familiar? Had you ever heard of Lena Morgana at all?
I had not. We talked about it a little bit, like, before this episode, but prior to that, I had not heard of Lena Morgana at all.
Yeah. I looked into this a little bit. I hadn't heard of her either. I looked into it a little bit when this question was first posted in Discord. And yeah, it is a kind of strange little tale that I had never heard before, but there has been, you know, press coverage of it. Basically, for anybody that doesn't know, Lena Morgana was a young performer. I believe she was born in Russia and came over here as a kid and was trying to start a career in the music industry as a teenager in, like, the mid to late 2000s. And as part of that, she eventually ended up coming into contact with another young performer, Stephanie Germanotta, better known as Lady Gaga, and their producer, I believe his name was Rob Fusari, who was working with Lena Morgana first, but then also started working with Lady Gaga, I think when she was still an NYU student. And then they all worked together for a while, and I think they wrote like 10 or 11 songs together. But then around the time of 2007 and 2008, it appears that that was when Lady Gaga blew up. And she had her first album, The Fame, had a few hit singles. And in that time, like, it seemed like Lena Morgana's fortunes kind of, like, she was supposed to have a record deal and like a special on MTV and all these other things. And they all kind of started to dry up. And then in 2008, Lena Morgana reportedly died after falling off the roof of the Staten Island Hotel in New York. And I guess there's always been some debate about whether she accidentally fell or whether she committed suicide. But yeah, basically, and then in the couple years after that, when Lady Gaga became this like huge superstar, I believe Lena Morgana's mother, the mother.
It's interesting that she said Lady Gaga is holding Lena Morgana's soul.
Yeah, that is weird. I just saw that. Yeah. And
You
she
know,
says,
I mean,
yeah.
With just to like, you know, leaving aside like the, you know, I'll take a skeptical stance since I was just ranting about how everyone needs to believe in gin. You know, I do empathize a lot with the mother because, like, if you're the mother of like a young aspiring musician or singer or vocalist, and then, you know, she tragically dies, and then you see this young person who reminds you of her in some way, and she's like having all this success, like I can understand how that would be, you know, just, you know, I could see my own mother becoming like outraged, like if, I don't know, I died tragically and then there was like some super successful like conspiracy podcaster, like, I don't know, who was Muslim, I don't know. Like, I could, yeah, I just, yeah, I you know, I just had a twinge of empathy for someone like going through that, you know,
Yeah, no, definitely. And I mean, well, you know, people really jumped on what she said, though. To read the whole quote here that she told The Gothamist, I believe, in, the New York Post, she told us in 2010. She said she has no plans to file a lawsuit. She simply wants her daughter to get her due. Quote, I'm doing this because I want to keep her spirit alive. Lady Gaga is holding Lena's soul, and I want her soul to be free. Every other word Gaga says is from Lena. She talks about having a dark and tragic life, but she had everything she wanted in the world. She went to the same high school as Nikki Hilton. Her parents were rich, but Lena did have a tough life, and she often talked about her tragic life. So, you know, it says, after Fusari introduced both of them, Lena and Gaga wrote about a dozen songs together, all recorded but never commercially released. Yana claims that, quote, Lena had that style. Gaga had a different style. She changed dramatically overnight. Tragically, Lena took her own life by jumping from a hotel in Staten Island, and 1 month later, then Stephanie Germanotta made her transformation into Lady Gaga. Lena's former boyfriend said the first time he saw the transformation, he was shocked. He told the paper, quote, it was the same style, the same look, the same music, the same voice, the same jawline, the way they expressed themselves. It was so shocking. It was like looking at a ghost. Well, you know what? I definitely know what they're talking about. I remember seeing, like, years ago when Lady Gaga, like, first came out, somebody, I think, showed me a video of her when she was still, like, an NYU student, like, playing at, I don't know, on the Lower East Side at, like, these tiny little venues. And I think it's almost been forgotten today that, like, when she was first running around trying to make music, God, I remember saying that it's like, oh, she looks like Alanis Morissette or something. She's wearing like kind of like a, you know, like a flannel like shirt and like jeans. Her hair is just black and maybe like in a ponytail or something. Like it was very just normie, like 2000s kind of, you know, indie singer-songwriter girl. And it wasn't until, I guess, 1 month after Lena Morgana died that they made this decision to completely overhaul her style in this, like, wild kind of, like drag queen kind of a party girl sort of thing that, you know, is the Lady Gaga we know today. So I guess, you know, I mean, putting aside the whole thing about, like, did she steal her soul in a money ritual, the music industry is a shady fucking place. And I think that is definitely within the possibility of something happening. Now, the question of like why that would happen, why would Lady Gaga get to be sort of picked? Like, if we're assuming Rob Fusari is the kind of immediate puppet master here, the handler, if you will, who gets to introduce either one of these girls to the industry, it's curious to know, like, what made him kind of do this hard pivot. When, like, if you watch a few of her performances, Lena Morgana's, that are on YouTube, she did seem to be very talented. She had kind of like this Amy Winehouse kind of, you know, like tragic young diva kind of energy. And of course, you know, that just like backs up like, oh, she died right around the time Amy Winehouse, and like the pressures of fame, like, you know, she had to jump off the thing. But I don't know. I mean, you could see maybe all kinds of possibilities. Like, was she so upset that like her identity was getting, like, maybe she found out that Lady Gaga was planning on like appropriating her entire style and like routine, and her own like producer, who was the person she thought was going to make her famous, was going to run off with Lady Gaga and make a bunch of money. I mean, I feel like that types of kind of shady bullshit happens all the time. I mean, was there something else that like she did or didn't do? Not to get too speculative, but like that she didn't do that pissed off people and decided like, we're not going to let you, you know, I don't know. I don't really know. I mean, Lady Gaga, independently of this story, definitely is somebody that like Vigilant Citizen was on the Lady Gaga is sus tip like a very long time ago. And it, I mean, there's some things in her, I think it was from her second album, I forget what video it was, but it's basically like she's this kind of like human android who gets taken to like an international like slave market, and all these like Euro terrorists, like businessmen or like smoking cigars, are like bidding on like these different like robot women to like buy them. I mean, it's got these like creepy fucking vibes to it that are in typical fashion. I'm sure some people hear this right now and be like, Satanism was a thing since the 80s and people were just riffing on that. It doesn't mean anything. But she was not just like doing things that were kind of dark or occulty, but also in this kind of like transhumanist kind of way. Like there were a lot of these themes worked into like her videos when she was kind of at her peak. And so, and you know, the mother was right. She is a rich girl. I forget which prep school she went to, but she was like a rich Manhattan girl.
This is actually a funny article that I came across. Speaking of, you know, trying to find the one conspiracy, the actual tagline of this website, which is henrymacow.com.
Oh, that's a spicy source right there.
You're
going into anti-Semitic territory.
Sure. Yeah, his tagline is there is only one conspiracy. And he, you know, is definitely Lady Gaga murder-pilled. He said, did Lady Gaga have a rival murdered? And his subtitle is, anyone versed in satanic rituals of the music industry knows that superstardom is reserved for those who murder or take part in the murder of a lover, parent, or sibling. So was she, I guess, her lover? I don't know. It says, Lena Morgana collaborated with Stefani Germanotta during 2007 until falling 10 stories to her death in October 6th, 2008. This wasn't a secret, though the media is broadcasting it now since the girl's Russian immigrant mother has come out saying, Lady Gaga is holding Lena's soul, and I want her soul to be free. You know, he repeats his subtitle. Lena Morgana, and then this is a witch name, was on the verge of her own music career taking off. Lots of images of her music are available on YouTube. When I compared Morgana's recording Wonderland with Gaga's Wunderland with a U.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, there's also a lot of casual, like, kind of dressing up like a sexy SS dominatrix shit kind of happening on and off throughout
that
Lady Gaga's
it was
career.
Between the autumnal equinox and Samhain, that, you know, since it was on October 4th. Some articles say 6th. So, but I feel like you can't say it was in between. Like, everything's in between two occult dates. So, I don't know. Henry Mark, how.
Okay. I don't know. But I will throw this out. Just a little tiny tidbit here. I don't know if there's really anything to it, but, you know, I always have to wonder about these record producers because I feel like, you know, there's like 5 of them that seem to basically monopolize like the entire music industry. Like, you know, nowadays, of course, we think about like Dr. Luke, who has a pretty fearsome reputation. in the industry. Kesha trying to like sue him and shit like that, and the judge threw it out. But it's a guy. I think he produces under a lot of like pseudonyms now, but he's basically still kind of like running the show. And he was a protege of Max Martin, who's the I think Swedish guy who did Ace of Base and then did like the Backstreet Boys, NSYNC, that whole late 90s, like Britney Spears. And we know how sus that was literally like a subgenre created by a pedophile, like business fraudster, Lou Pearlman in Orlando. And, which is where Nickelodeon was, Dan Schneider, et cetera, et cetera. So, okay, this is a fucked up, this could be a fucked up industry, especially at the like teenage girl pop star level. But I was just, looking at Rob Fusari's, Wikipedia article, which is not very long for somebody who's like a multi-Grammy nominated record producer and songwriter who's done songs with Beyonce, Kelly Rowland, Will Smith, Whitney Houston, and Lady Gaga. I guess he's known as 8-Bit, is kind of like his stage producer name. And all it says about his early life is he was born between 1967 or 68 or 1976, depending on the source, and raised in Livingston, New Jersey. A child prodigy, Fusari won numerous piano competitions at Radio City Music Hall at 8 years old. Okay, so just saying he is a gifted child, and they don't even know when he was born. Like, the fact that they don't know if he was born in, like, 1967 or 68 or 76, like, what the fuck does that even mean? Why is this guy so mysterious? And I guess
articles differ on the date of the death, too, right?
Yeah, and she actually sued him, I think. He wrote Bootylicious and Wild Wild West by Will Smith, and Destiny's Child. And, of course, we just talked on the Trillbillies a little bit about Jay-Z and Beyonce and their, general vibes. And it's just strange that, like, this guy, I don't know, like, he launched Destiny's Child's career with the hit No, No, No. In the late 1990s, and I guess he kind of, he was the main producer on Gaga's Grammy-winning debut album, The Fame. He's credited on Paparazzi, Beautiful, Dirty, Rich, Again and Again, Brown Eyes, and Disco Heaven, and he's still signed to Sony ATV Publishing, but I don't know, like, he hasn't really done anything after Lady Gaga. I mean, he did like one Fifth Harmony song in 2015, Brave, Honest, Beautiful. And that was, it looks like, about it. Like, he didn't work on her subsequent albums or anything like that. But he was like this strange child prodigy who found both these girls. I see a picture of him with Britney Spears, I think in his glory days. And I don't know. I mean, he might just be like a talented piano player or something, but it is strange. I wonder, because also, Lady Gaga was signed to Interscope Records, and I'd love to circle back around and do like a whole exploration of Interscope Records one day. I don't know, if you could do me a favor, Khalid, and just look up the Wikipedia of Interscope Records real quick, or the logo, the classic logo of it.
Okay. Is that I see. Because of the spiral? Is that what?
Yeah, it's a big spiral. I don't know what it means, but that, Well,
this is just, a spiral, right? Like, I mean,
I know, it's not a triangle
spiral. Yeah, I mean, there are some cases of that triangle spiral, like the Drake Bell t-shirt, where it's like, you don't want to be, I'm generally pretty skeptical of like spotting out the triangle spiral, but like that one was just like too much, where it's like, you can't really, even if it is a coincidence, like, you don't want to be the one saying it's coincidence. It's just too fucking much. But I don't know about that. I mean, I guess, it's a spiral. It's not a triangle spiral. Spirals are pretty popular, icons.
Sure. But that's just really where it starts, because like Interscope Records was really one of the most like influential record labels of, I would say, like the 1990s and the 2000s, with like during really like the reign of like the MTV era. They acquired the exclusive rights in 1992 for Death Row Records, so they were very big in promoting like that Suge Knight's like particular style of gangster rap in the 90s, and also the company itself was founded by Jimmy Iovine, who's now, such a big deal. He's already creeped me out a little bit, or always creeped me out a little bit, but also Ted Field. And for anybody that doesn't know, I don't think we got to spend a lot of time on them in maybe the first part of the Gustavus Myers series, History of the Great American Fortunes. But Ted Field is an heir of the Marshall Field fortune from Chicago. And they're the family that owned, the department stores and then later the Chicago Sun-Times. And so he's the son of Marshall Field IV, who owned the Chicago Daily News, and came out to Hollywood and started working, as a producer. And then he founded Interscope Communications with a guy named Robert Court, who was a big studio executive back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, who coincidentally started his career working as the personal assistant for William Colby at the CIA. Just throwing that out there. Anyways, Interscope Records was spun in 1990. It was spun off with Jimmy Iovine and Ted Field as a joint venture with Atlantic Records and Warner Music Group, which is basically, as we, I think, went over in like our Eagles episode and others, was actually like the McKinney parking lot company that was like some kind of cutout for Meyer Lansky's like mafia network that went and bought Warner Communications in the 70s and then merged with, I believe, Time Life in 1989, where, God, there's like so much to go with, where like Doug Lyman's dad helped Steve Ross like convince all the Blue Blood Wasps at Time Life to merge with Warner, creating Time Warner. Anyways, so they went off, I guess, in 1995. They cut to their ties with Time Warner. But then they went on to like basically produce really some of the edgiest acts of like the 90s. They were really big, I remember, in like rap metal. I think they did Limp Bizkit. I'm pretty sure they did Korn, like Smash Mouth, Marilyn Manson, 9 Inch Nails. Like some of the really like darkest, like edgiest, like mainstream music. Eminem, of course, and stuff like that. And I would say that they even got into it with like MCA, which has a whole nother like sus thing. And actually Geffen got involved. Yeah, because Geffen owned, or MCA owned Geffen Records, I believe, by this point. And then Geffen Records is actually merged into Interscope in, I think, 1999. So now, like, it's Interscope, Geffen, A&M Records to this day. So just all kinds of Geffen connections, popping up. But I think then, it might almost be like the last big star that they rolled out that they had a huge success with was Lady Gaga in 2008. So I've just noticed, like, this is very, maybe non-scientific or like anecdotal or whatever, that like the Interscope artists, I feel like in their videos have like a higher Vigilant Citizen score than maybe some of the other record labels.
I definitely
like, not to say that they're not sus, but
well, I think that like Vigilant Citizen actually has said that about Interscope. I think. If I'm not mistaken.
Well, I think he has, because, I mean, he points out, obviously, to, like, the spiral on their logo and stuff like that. But, okay, real quick, I just found this. I did not know this, but anybody who's saying that, like, I'm not being serious right now, and I'm just, like, making a bunch of ridiculous accusations, blah, blah, blah.
You're smearing people without any proof, but, we didn't, like, really say that it was true. Anyway, what? Yeah.
How's this for an interesting proof from The Smoking Gun from 2011? Cocaine ring used music label to ship drugs. Feds, pickups and deliveries made from Interscope. Members of a narcotics ring that sent large amounts of cocaine and cash back and forth across the U.S. in music, quote, road cases arranged pickups and deliveries at the offices of Interscope Records, a music industry power whose roster includes artists like U2, Eminem, and Lady Gaga, according to federal investigators. Department of Justice prosecutors this week provided defense lawyers with shipping records detailing pickups and deliveries made at Interscope's Los Angeles office by a cargo firm that was used to transport the music cases, which were alternately stuffed with kilos of cocaine and upwards of $1 million in cash. A year-long DEA investigation has resulted in the indictment of James Rosemont on 18 felony charges, which could result in a sentence of life in prison for the 46-year-old rap music manager. Rosemond, pictured in a below mugshot, is being held without bail in Manhattan's Metropolitan Correctional Center, the same place where El Chapo and Epstein slipped and hung himself. In a letter sent this week to Rosemond's lawyer, prosecutor Todd Kaminsky disclosed that investigators were turning over an assortment of discovery material that included 65 pages of records from Rocket Cargo, a large freight forwarder whose client list includes scores of musical acts. Kaminsky noted the Rocket documents were, quote, specifically referencing pickups and deliveries at Interscope Records and a recording studio on Manhattan's West Side. While it is unclear how members of the narcotics ring would have had access to Interscope's Santa Monica headquarters, Rosemond's biggest client, Los Angeles rapper The Game, records for the label. Additionally, the Smoking Gun has learned a road manager for The Game has been implicated in the bi-coastal trafficking ring. Interscope is a division of Universal Music Group, the world's largest music company. UMG itself is owned by Vivendi, the French media conglomerate. Prosecutors and DEA agents have been provided detailed insider accounts of the drug trafficking ring by former Rosemond associates who have admitted their role in the operation. Several of these cooperators have described how they were dispatched to either Interscope or various music studios to retrieve road cases stuffed with either cash or cocaine. So, okay. That's pretty interesting. Rocket Cargo. You know, I don't know. They're just like trafficking. I think that they're kind of trying to make it sound like, oh, it's just this like renegade rap manager that was doing it under the nose of Interscope Records. But really makes you wonder about, you know, even going back to the 70s, how all these like Geffen label stars always had like tons of cocaine, even though it was like $600 a gram or something, you know, and like what kind of fucking business. What kind of other businesses are they involved with on top of just music? And I don't know, like that. So, you know, obviously that doesn't mean that like they're Satanists who kill people in money rituals or anything like that.
Well,
but it shows
I
you
have
there's
to
a
say,
blurry line of criminality here.
I was checking in on Vigilant Citizen, you know, on his webpage because it's relevant, and I'm always curious to see what Vigilant Citizen's up to. I haven't been to the site in a while, and, you know, I happen to notice that one of his marquee articles published 4 weeks ago is about a new pop artist who I hadn't heard of, Shen Sia. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. She wrote a song called Run Run, or, you know, performs a song called Run Run. Vigilant Citizen, I'll just read what he has to say, because, you know, there's no paraphrasing any of this. When I write about a new artist that's suddenly popular, I usually briefly describe the path that led them to the mainstream media. And from one artist to another, the path is strikingly similar. First, the artist is unsigned, but has a sizable following and is generating quite a buzz. Well, that's pretty normal, but then the artist gets signed to a major label, often Interscope Records. Literally, that's what he wrote. So he has noticed, and everything changes. The artist suddenly starts making the one-eye sign in photo shoots and releases a ritualistic video filled with occult symbolism. Shensia, a popular artist from Jamaica who was crossing over to the mainstream, followed this exact path. After releasing remixes and collaborating with popular artists, including Sean Paul and Christina Aguilera, Shensia's notoriety grew in Jamaica and across the world. In 2019, Shensia signed with Interscope Records. Shortly after, things got very occult elite. Her profile pic on Instagram is now a one-eye sign. She, in a recent photo shoot, she makes an unmistakable one-eye sign. But what's interesting, actually, is that similar to Lady Gaga, a few months after signing with Interscope, Shensia's mother died unexpectedly, an event that was widely mediatized in Jamaica. While several artists showed her support, intense rumors circulated that Shensia sacrificed her mother for fame. So, I mean, I guess, like, you know, money rituals are something that's widely believed in and, you know, and in fact is widely practiced due to the belief in it, you know, sort of in line with what we were saying earlier. So I guess in a way it kind of makes sense that these rumors would emerge, whether or not they're true. But it is interesting that, you know, this is playing out again, this whole idea. And it is odd, you know, I am looking at Vigilant Citizen, and of course, you know, it's Vigilant Citizen. You know,
we do not agree with everything
he's
Vigilant
very
Citizen
histrionic,
posts.
But I feel like he has a little bit of a point, like, about, like, I don't, like, you know, he has this one sentence where he says, in Run Run, Breslauer, took innovative steps by making the video about, ellipsis, a guy being tortured and sacrificed. There's also lots of imagery that's reminiscent of Little Nas X's Montero, where he literally descends into hell. In short, Run Run is not about quote-unquote art, it is about forcing the exact same imagery down the throats of people. Shenseea was simply chosen to bring that crap to Jamaica. So, I do think that he has a point where, like, the imagery of these videos, like, has gotten to, like, pretty repetitive. Like, are people really, like, like, the whole thing that, like, do you understand art? Like, aren't you bored of this? Like, I mean, I don't know, like...
Yeah, I'm looking at screenshots from the video right now.
Yeah,
and
it's
really
very...
is, like, in your face.
Yeah, laying it on thick, he's holding, like, his heart... She's, like, licking a sacrificial dagger.
Like Michael Aquino's SS dagger.
Yeah, I think it's actually...
He's, like, in a cage. He's literally being, like, strapped to an altar before, like, being sacrificed. She's, like, floating on the altar in hell above, like, a bunch of lava, dressed up kind of with, like, devil horns on.
Yeah.
I mean... it's like, who's asking for
in
this?
the garden? Yeah, exactly. Like, and obviously, like, I'm sure she didn't come up with this. Like, someone, they might have even hired the same dude who, like, directed Lil Nas X's video. I don't know. I hope I'm not insulting anybody.
I think it was. I think it might have actually been a woman, and I found a company that does that on Instagram. Yeah, so you need to check yourself.
I can't believe I just did that.
Yeah, but I mean, if you look at, it's interesting. If you look at, he does quote like Buzz Caribbean and how there's like headlines there, and there's like rappers in Jamaica that are totally saying that like she sacrificed her mother to like be famous in America, because I think there is on average like a lower bar. Not a lower bar, but like there's more openness to that kind of concept. Those concepts are not so ermy and foreign in Caribbean countries that like I mean around the world. So it's actually Western and chauvinistic to like everybody whoever says that like people do devilish rituals and shit. But
of course.
I don't know.
I mean, this is like widely believed in all sorts of places, including in parts of the United States. Like it's, widely held belief. And yes, it is quite Western chauvinistic and colonial to be incredibly dismissive of it. But yeah, I do find it odd. I mean, obviously it gets attention. We're talking about it now. Then again, we are a podcast about like the occult and these type of conspiracy theories that float around. And media symbolism is one of our perennial topics. But so it is attention getting. But I mean, not that we're someone who you'd really. I don't know, like why this like over and over and over. Like, surely anything with, like, an attractive woman, like, being, like, naked would get, like, a fair amount of attention. Like, I don't know. I mean, and there are music videos about other subjects, but, like, why? Like, I don't know. I mean,
well,
I guess I'm just clutching my
pearls.
I know, you're
clutching your pearls. I'm looking at Christian Breslauer,
who
his only, like, press photo is, like, a trendy picture of him, but, like, with his face completely, like, beaten up and, like, bandaged. Like, he just got jumped or something. And it's so annoying. It's like the same bio is everywhere you look. It's like Christian Breslauer is a young, ambitious director, writer, and cinematographer. He cuts his teeth on telling authentic and compelling stories. His visual style is bold and gritty. Christian was born in South Florida, where he built his name in the streets, shooting for some of Miami's hottest artists, following in the steps of his idol, David Fincher.
Shot for Felix Rodriguez.
Yeah, exactly. So he's just rocket. I don't even know how old this guy is, but he moved to LA in 2016 to create premium content for premium artists. He's collaborated with Marshmello, Roddy Ricch, Jason Derulo, Little Baby, and I think Chris Brown. And so he made Industry Baby. He did Bibi Reja's Sacrifice, which I think also has like sacrifice themes. And Industry Baby is, I guess, not.
Actually, Vigilant Citizen was complaining about that in the same. Wow, actually, yeah, he directed Lil Nas X's Industry Baby and Sacrifice, yeah. And Vigilant Citizen was saying that was also, about a guy being tortured and sacrificed while Rexa drinks his blood.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. There's, like, no information really on this guy.
Wow, this guy's, profile, like, his personal website is, like, a QAnon, like, dream/nightmare. He's like his personal like picture is like him beaten up, like he's like in the Black
I told you.
Eye Club,
I just said that. I just said
right.
that. Yeah, it's like he's been jumped or something, and
Well, you've heard that thing about like the Black Eye Club or whatever, Yeah, like
what was the Black Eye Club?
Oh, it's like a thing. Like people will post pictures of like I don't know, like Obama having like a black, like, you know, or looking like he has a black eye, or like, or George Bush looking like he has a black, or like say like, oh, you know, they bunch each other in the eye or something. It's some kind of thing where they're all like in a group together, and it involves like having a black eye. So yeah, it's not, but I just looked at the picture myself now, and like it's in particular, yeah, it looks like one of those type of things.
Yeah, I mean, he's done a lot of videos, and they all look like they have like some kind of scary demonic thing happening in them. Not gonna obviously watch them all now, but it's almost like he just popped up out of nowhere and starts getting like these jobs to like. Yeah, I'm looking at Sacrifice by Bibi Regis. She has vampire teeth. And then, like, the other video by her, she's standing in front of, like, a burning building, Sabotage, in, like, a dark gown. Like, okay. It's, like, so, you know, I don't, like, who is this guy?
You know,
like, I don't know.
I've seen plenty of, like, music videos where it's just, like, you know, the young starlet just, like, writhing on, like, a couch. Maybe those don't get as much attention, but, like, you know, not that I think that those are, like, wholesome or valuable for society. Sorry to be prudish, but I really don't think that these have, like, that much artistic value. You know, like, you can say
they have
that,
money
like,
behind them.
Yeah, you can say that, like, it's irrelevant and, like, you know, you're clutching your pearls, but you cannot tell me that that is artistically interesting or valuable. So I just don't get the point. Like, you know, I don't get the point of defending it. I don't get the point of, like, making it.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously,
and it's
there's
like
an
every
audience
one of these
for it,
he's
but I
done,
feel like it kind of was created by, like, I feel like it's not the... I feel like it's the chicken and the egg, and I feel like the in this case it was the chicken of the videos before the egg of the audience. You know.
No, true. I mean, yeah. Well, you know, who's downstream from who, really? You know, I mean, I think it's a dialectic, but you know, there's going to be like million. These are the biggest stars right now. Like he just did a Doja Cat video where she plays a man catching spider. Okay. And you know, yeah, and also his first credit. I'm looking at his IMDb right now. He has almost 30 credits, and they start in 2019. So in the last 2 years, including like during COVID, he's made like 30 music videos for some of the biggest names like in music. And his first one credited is for Trippie Redd, Under Enemy Arms. And I think we probably brought up Trippie Redd as one of these young rappers that maybe Busta Rhymes was like, you know, warning to stop acting like Trippie Redd, you know, like 3 Red 6s or something, you know. But it's just, you know, God, talk about occulted. Like the music industry is so shady, and this could be like the rich kid of some like international arms dealer. I have no fucking clue, but there's like no information on him at all. He just popped up out of nowhere and now is like doing all these satanic videos for everybody. And like Interscope is just throwing money at him, you know. I mean, honestly, the Miami music scene is just sus. And so I think Vigilant Citizen is not wrong to point this one out, but you know.
Yeah, I mean, Vigilant Citizen's like a little bit out of his mind, but I can kind of understand how this stuff like just drove him out of his mind.
Yes,
you know,
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Even if you can't prove it, but
he's also concerned that a 1963 list of current communist goals is becoming a reality right before our eyes right now.
Exactly.
So.
Yeah, that's why we say, like, we do not endorse everything Vigilant Citizen says. He is an evangelical Christian, which we are not, by the way, for anyone listening. We're
emphatically not Christians. We're not Christians.
I'm like a retired Catholic. So, yeah.
Yes, if you couldn't get from the title of our podcast, but I guess maybe doesn't signify like any kind of Muslim perspective to people, I don't know, but I'm Muslim, as I mention almost every single episode if you listen to the podcast. Yeah, or I feel like I at least allude to every single episode. My name's Khalid.
Yeah, but anyways, I mean, I think we might have gotten. Interscope also did "To Pimp a Butterfly," which I mean, I like Kendrick Lamar and all, but that was like a dark title. I think, you know, coming out of Interscope Records. And Die Antwoord, our favorite South African artist. Yeah, of course.
You know, at least, you know, we do, we're surpassing Vigilant Citizen, so I think our more measured approach is better. You know, he also has a Patreon, but we're doing better than he is. We're beating Vigilant Citizen.
Okay, you know, you know, anyways. Okay, so, yeah, I don't know. Did Salieri kill Mozart? I really don't know. I'd have to watch Amadeus again.
I mean, Amadeus. I think that the story in Amadeus, as far as I know, that's like apocryphal. But I don't know. I mean, maybe it needs to be re-explored. I mean, like, you know, music people will tell you, like music historians will tell you that that's like a made-up little mythical story, including like, you know, not only that it was Salieri, but the whole thing of like the person like coming to him at night and demanding the requiem. That is like, you know, not a true story. But I don't know. Might be.
Yeah.
Might need to
Anybody interested in like money rituals?
It would be interesting to do like a deep
from...
history of like sus music stuff, because like that is so rich. Like just imagine like, you know, even like in the 19th century, like, you know, talking about like Wagner and stuff, like that would be super interesting to do. Like going back to, you know, the 18th century and doing Mozart, that, you know, classical composers, that would really be interesting, because like, you know, that's like really where like, you know, you can really get into some kind of crazy
LaRouche pill
intrigue.
territory.
Yeah, well,
that too. But yeah.
Well, oh yeah,
some,
true. The Verdi
intrigue,
tuning,
yeah.
the Verdi tuning. Watch out, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I don't know. Anybody that wants like an interesting thread on money rituals, particularly outside of like an American context, in places like maybe the Caribbean or like in Africa. I think Too Young Badass, the venerable Twitter user, did a pretty interesting thread on that a while back. So, you know, hit that into your search bar and read about that. It's an interesting concept. I don't want to go off too hard on it right now. I need to read more into it, but I mean, people be doing money rituals around the world.
Oh,
just,
yeah. People,
like, let it be known. Like,
yeah.
regardless of like whether it works or anything like that, like, this is a thing that the practice people have done. I don't know if they do it at the highest levels of the music industry per se, but there's definitely some weird imagery emanating out that they are almost to their own artistic detriment, though I guess that never stopped them in the first place. They're pushing out relentlessly to be like, look, kids, like, your favorite star is a Satanist. Like, sacrifice is hot. Like, I don't know. Like, they keep banging that drum. And Lady Gaga was like a stepping stone on the way to where we are now with that kind of, what if it was trendy to like do some kind of horrible dystopia, like Luciferian, like nightmare techno world, but like glamorous. Anyways,
did you know the Vigilant Citizen has forums, and they're fairly active? This is amazing. Someone posted on Monday, Barack Obama is the Antichrist. That's surprising to me that people are still on that tip.
Really?
This is an amazing thread. Here's a compilation of prophetic dreams, specifically mentioning him as the Antichrist.
Okay, all right.
Well, there is something about the birth certificate, the Muslim ties.
See, it's
the
a
Egypt
lot like
Akhenaten, his charisma.
Oh yeah, of course he's Akhenaten. Yeah, everyone's been saying that. It reminds me a little bit of Tom on the Trillbillies telling us about his Pentecostal friend years ago who had like a dream that Samuel Alito was going to like outlaw abortion because he had a dream of like whatever the National Bank building was, and it was like an arrow pointing right at the Supreme Court. So once again, like evangelicals get like they psyop themselves into when they're actually looking at Freemasonic conspiracies. They think they're like seeing a sign from God that like Obama is the Antichrist or something. But actually, maybe he's just a Boule Mason. You know, like it's a, you know.
Wow, this is amazing. This is still like they're still like deep in like Obama era, like early Obama era, like Islamophobia. You know, it's like he has these Islamic ties. You know, see, I don't like these people, everyone. I don't like evangelical Christians. Like, we did a whole episode talking shit about Catholics. Like, you know, it's just because I don't know, maybe people think we're Christians because we try to apologize and like be nice to those Catholics and Christians who are chill. Like, I don't know, but because they are out there, you know, and they're
not all Christians are chill. I think we can safely say.
Yes, they're not all chill.
Even
not
the ones
Muslims
that are on the
chill.
Vigilant Citizen tip, I appreciate that they're on that tip, but they have to be very careful lest they get psyoped like they did in the 80s into thinking that, like, I don't know.
Wow, but like, you know what? There's also a Muslim poster on these forums. Sorry, this is going far abroad from our topic, but there's also someone posting, you know. So this is, I guess, the reactionary synthesis that we're seeing play out through our podcast on the left now, where, you know, you have evangelicals posting and also Muslims posting on the Vigilant Citizens forums, and that's what we're bringing to the left-wing discourse.
It's a real kind of throwback.
Yeah, this is actually an interesting point this person made in the comments on this thing, saying, well, there's a hadith that, Dajjal will have one eye. I don't know if that's something that Christians say about the Antichrist as well, but, it's a famous...
Oh, they have one eye?
Yeah, that Dajjal will have one eye.
Huh, interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. We're almost at 9 o'clock here.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm looking at Kate Bush. Oh, God. I mean, if people are going to get mad at the other questions, if we say something out of pocket about Kate Bush, people are really going to come for us because they love Kate Bush.
Yeah. Well, we should probably stop here.
Okay.
And
yeah,
we
just
can,
as well.
Yeah, rather than going on Kate Bush, and we can do more of these, or we can just come back to these next month. I don't know. I feel like we've had a substantive conversation. I hope people will be pleased, that, in the amount that we've gone through on these topics.
Maybe we'll start doing these. Maybe I don't know. Maybe we'll do these bi-monthly. Maybe
bi-monthly, but we're making such slow progress as is.
Well,
I guess we could do bi-monthly.
We'd be getting them faster, or we could do like a 2-part thing.
Oh, I see what you mean. You mean bi-monthly
I mean?
in the sense of like being published by month. Sorry, I thought you meant semi-monthly. Yeah.
Oh,
I see.
yeah. No, I mean like 2 times
twice
a month instead of one.
I don't know.
time
I feel like that might be a lot.
Might be a lot.
Yeah.
Or we could just do it in or we could do it in like.
I don't know. I mean, yeah, we might just go down in flames. We might just like be besieged by like Black Hammer or something, or like in a confederation with Maoist Zoomers for like remarks we made in the Q&A episodes without doing proper investigation and yet speaking. If we do too many of these.
Yeah. Well, I guess we can see. I don't know. We'll see.
We'll
I feel
evaluate.
bad. I feel bad not answering questions.
I know. I do as well. But we just, we're certainly giving the questions that we have answered their due. No one can say that we're not doing that. It's only through our thoroughness that, we're a little bit behind, but we'll get to them. I don't think people will begrudge us too much. Like I said, depending on how long we do this, inshallah, Subliminal Jihad will have a long, and fruitful life.
True.
We will, we could do this for the rest of our lives, so when we retire or die, you can't really hold that against us.
Yeah.
It'd be funny if
most of
someone
these are
didn't
pretty
come
evergreen.
to our funeral, like if Jimmy Fallon Gong doesn't come to our funeral because we didn't get to his last question.
It wasn't. We didn't mean to. Yeah. But I guess we can leave it right here for now. And thanks again to the Grotto for providing some very substantive questions and making the Grotto such a lively place.
Yeah, the Grotto's thriving.
It's thriving.
Yeah, we recently instituted some subcategories for the different sub-channels to make it easy to organize. In line with the discussion on this episode, I was very much grieved, as I was I had a lot of angst about creating a separate religion and politics category, but I mean, it makes things easier to organize. So I did it, even though it was painful to me to do.
Yeah, I think Jimmy Fallon did point out that you managed to put the religion tab and the occult tab as far away from each other as possible.
No, well, I put occultism under religion, included with all the religions that have sub channels, including Islam. I did put Islam and Christianity on top, and I put occultism underneath that. Maybe I need to move Christianity to the bottom underneath occultism and Judaism, which I think someone kind of facetiously said, how come there's no Judaism, thing, kind of joking, but because they brought it up, I felt like I had to make one. But people just started posting, pictures of people dancing the hora in there, so I feel like maybe it wasn't, what I was supposed to accomplish, but... Anyway, maybe I'll move the Christianity thing down so people stop thinking that we're Christian. I try to walk a fine line because I don't want to. I feel like I always am being so hard on Christians. That's but then every once in a while I'll see something come online which is like these Christians on subliminal jihad with their Christian perspective imposing on, it's like, what?
I don't get it.
It's bizarre.
Yeah.
Like I said, I think off air, like I think that it's because like we sometimes like we sometimes we've passed moral judgments maybe about certain things, or can be perceived as moralizing, which people in the Anglophone world, which is most of our audience because we're an English podcast, associate with Christianity. And also we're Americans, like a Christian country. So like maybe people who aren't even in the Anglophone world, might receive our podcast as being Christian because of just the ambient Christian influences in our culture.
And just like our antipathy generally towards Satan.
Satan, yeah.
In America,
Satan,
that means
and yeah, we
generally
talk about
one thing.
God. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well,
but
stop loving Satan, and then we won't talk about how we don't like him so much.
Yeah. If the Christians
no
were
one would
any good
have
at
a
fighting
problem
them,
if our
then-
podcast was about how we love Satan. No one, except for I guess us in the alternate reality where. I don't know. I guess if in the mirror universe where we're Satanists, then the people who are Satanists, I guess, would have a problem with our podcast being about Satan.
Maybe.
I don't know. I mean, obviously, I'm running out of steam here. I'm saying even bigger,
It's
more
okay.
nonsense than usual.
Yeah. It's okay. But we'll be back next month. Anybody else on the line there that we didn't get to, we will get to you. We'll answer more. But until next time, dear listeners, stay vigilant.
Peace.
People seem to see right through me, but I'm alive. I can hear their ghostly voices as I walk by. Why was I born into this world of pain, where angels scatter, hang their wings in shame? Well, I'm still waiting to be saved. As I lay on my tear-stained pillow, can anyone hear me call? As I lay on my tear-stained pillow, can anyone hear me fall? Can anyone hear me call? Is anyone there at all? 'Cause I'm still breathing. Come lay with me. Together we'll rest in peace. I brush against them as they flash their golden smiles. Their souls are rotting underneath their clothes and style. Something is wrong when all the good ones crumble. They're barely breathing, buried 6 feet under. Yeah, I'm still waiting to be saved. As I lay on my tear-stained pillow, can anyone hear me call? As I lay on my tear-stained pillow, can anyone hear me fall? Can anyone hear me call? Is anyone there at all? 'Cause I'm still breathing. Come lay with me. Together we'll rest in